Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear guests, esteemed professionals and professors and industry playmakers, welcome to our event, which is a global trend happening all over. And I think Jordan is just putting a stepping stone for it. And RSS would like to be the pioneers in this. Circular economy in food industries, challenges and opportunities with special focus on Jordan context. I would like to call upon Engineer Rafat Asi, the Vice President of RSS, to give the welcoming remarks. Please.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صباح الخير. يسعدني أن أرحب بكم جميعا وأرى العديد من الوجوه المألوفة خاصة من القطاع الصناعي، فأهلا وسهلا بكم. أيضا من مختلف الوزارات والجهات، وزارة البيئة، وزارة الصناعة والتجارة، وزارة التخطيط، وأيضا من المؤسسات الدولية، فأهلا وسهلا بكم جميعا في هذه الورشة المهمة عن الاقتصاد الدائري. وهذا المفهوم هو مفهوم يعني نسبيا قديم، لكن بحاجة إلى أنه نكمل بالعمل عليه. الجمعية صحيح كانت من الرياديين محاولة العمل على هذا العمل من تسعينيات القرن الماضي. بدأنا بالعمل مع البنك الدولي. بالعام 2004 أسسنا وحدة الإنتاج الأنظف اللي بتنفذ مشاريع في الإنتاج الأنظف وكفاءة الموارد، وعملنا مع بعض الصناعات وتأهيل أيضا السيرفيس بروفايدرز. فكلنا سعادة إنه نكمل بنفس المشوار اليوم. And I'll switch a little bit to English for Professor Komar. I would like to welcome you, Professor Komar from University of West of England. He will join us and he has a presentation, I think, and put his experience to this symposium. In fact, we are happy to have this gathering of experts from ministries, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Trade and Industry, and other ministries, and as well as food industries. Some of them we have worked with them on SwitchMed, and also service providers that we work together with some industries here in Jordan. This symposium will focus on circular economy. The concept is not new, and we have at RSS started working on this concept since 90s of the last centuries, where we work with around 30 industries on the principles of waste minimization, pollution prevention, and we continued the work on cleaner production, resource efficiency, where we established the cleaner production unit in the year 2004. And recently we worked on a project, I think it's a very important project. The first phase of that project called SwitchMed project was in 5 years ago, where we worked with around 12 industries, and now phase 2 of that project, where we continue working with food and chemical industries. I wish you a very successful symposium today, and successful discussions and results, inshallah. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Rafat, for the welcoming remarks. Not to further add, I would like to welcome Mrs. Rima Ras, Director of Industrial R&D Fund, the Higher Council for Science and Technology, and Muna Zaqsaw will follow her afterwards, and she is the manager of the Newton Khaldi Fund, the British Embassy in Amman. Please come.
صباح الخير جميعا.
بحكي الترجمه موجوده، الترجمه متوفره، اللي بيحب عربي انجليزي عربي موجوده الهيدسيت.
بداية بدي أشكر الجمعية العلمية الملكية وزميلنا الدكتور المؤيد على إنه نظم لنا هذا النشاط، لأنه إحنا شفنا اليوم كثير من الزملاء اللي إحنا لنا سنتين مش شايفينهم، فكثير إحنا مبسوطين بلقائهم صراحة. صندوق دعم البحث العلمي والتطوير في الصناعة هو صندوق بتبع المجلس الأعلى للعلوم والتكنولوجيا. تأسس تأسس هذا الصندوق من بدايات المجلس الأعلى للعلوم والتكنولوجيا منذ التأسيس، لأنه كانوا مهتمين وواعيين للدور المهم اللي بيلعبه القطاع الصناعي في التنمية الاقتصادية. فأسسوا هذا الصندوق. الغاية منه كانت إنه نقوي العلاقة بين 3 شركاء مهمين، اللي هو الصندوق كجهة بتستقبل التمويل من الحكومة، الجامعات والمراكز البحثية والشركات الاستشارية كدور للمعرفة، وهم اللي بيشتغلوا على الأبحاث وهم اللي عندهم نتائج الأبحاث وأب تو ديت تو ذا نوليدج دايما، والصناعة اللي هي بتفتح أبوابها لهدول الباحثين عشان يطبقوا النتائج اللي توصلوا إليها في المختبر ويحولوها لمنتجات وشو اسمه ونيو بزنسز يعني. فالهدف إنه إحنا نطور منتجاتنا والعمليات الإنتاجية داخل المصانع الأردنية، نعظم العوائد ونزيد القيمة المضافة والمكون التكنولوجي، وإنه نبني أعمال جديدة وبالتالي خلق فرص عمل جديدة مبنية على العلوم والتكنولوجيا وحسب النيد تاع شبابنا المتعلم. بالنسبة لمجالات دعم الصندوق، إحنا مصاري الصندوق بندفعها، كل مشروع بندفع عليه 30,000 دينار، بنخصصهم لتطوير منتجات صناعية جديدة، تحسين جودة المنتجات الصناعية، زيادة كفاءة العملية الإنتاجية داخل المصانع، زيادة تنافسية الصناعات الوطنية، تطوير ونقل التكنولوجيا، تطوير القوى العاملة داخل المصانع، ورفع كفاءة الصيانة والإدارة في الصناعات الأردنية. وطبعاً إحنا very flexible الصندوق، أي شيء بطلبوا منا لجنة الإدارة ممكن إنه إحنا ندعم فيه صناعتنا الوطنية، لأن الهدف من هذا الصندوق هو دعم مباشر للصناعة والمصانع الأردنية. هلا زي ما حكينا إنه إحنا قيمة الدعم اللي إحنا بنقدمه 30,000 دينار، وبنود الموازنة هي نصرفها على مكافأة الباحث، أجور وخدمات علمية وتكنولوجية، أجور الفحوصات يعني العلمية والخدمات العلمية والتكنولوجية اللي بنقدمها، القوى البشرية إذا مشروع يحتاج لفنيين لعمالة عشان ينفذوا المشروع، المواد المستهلكة وتكاليف التنقل عشان نسهل وصول الباحث والصناعي يشوفوا بعض، والأجهزة والمعدات. إحنا كصندوق ما بنغطي هاي الكلفة، وبنعتبر إنه هاي كلها رأس مالية بغطيها المصنع يعني عشان يطور شغله. هلا إحنا نشاطاتنا بتاخذ 3 أشكال. الشكل الأول هو المنح اللي إحنا بنقدمها للمشاريع المشتركة بين الصناعة والأكاديمية، بناء القدرات ونقل التكنولوجيا. بالنسبة للمنح طبعاً هلا يعني إحنا كل شغلنا يعني اللي اشتغلناه خلال السنوات السابقة كان إنه إحنا بنعطي مش 30,000، هو up to 30,000، ودائما يعني الإمباكت بيكون يعني يا إنه بيصير في منتج جديد، يا بتكون في مشكلة معينة عند المصنع بنحل لهم إياه، يا إنه بنحسن من جودة المنتج اللي موجود عند المصنع وما إلى ذلك. بس عشان نعزز دور البحث العلمي ونزيد تنافسية المنتج الوطني، صرنا نوقع اتفاقيات وننفذ برامج مع مؤسسات دولية. البرنامج الأول اللي إحنا نفذناه هو برنامج الإبداع الأردني الإسباني. وقعنا اتفاقية مع مؤسسة التنمية التكنولوجية الصناعية الإسبانية، وهون إحنا بندعم المشاريع لغاية 250,000 يورو. الجانب الإسباني بيغطوا 175,000 يورو، وإحنا الجانب الأردني بنغطي 75,000 يورو. الصندوق بيغطي 45,000، والباقي الجهات المشاركة من سواء جامعات أو صناعة. البرنامج الثاني اللي إحنا كمان اشتغلنا عليه اللي هو برنامج الخبراء الألماني. هلا هذا البرنامج موجود بغرفة صناعة عمان، ودائما بيستقطبوا الخبراء الألمان عشان يساعدوا المصانع الأردنية. بس الجديد اللي إحنا عملناه بهذا البرنامج إنه إحنا شبكنا هذا الخبير بمشاريعنا إحنا. يعني مرات إنه الباحث بتكون عنده النوليدج، بس مرات الإشي التطبيقي بيكون شوية صعب، بدنا خبرات إضافية. ففكرنا انه من خلال هذا البرنامج انه احنا ممكن نعمل هذا التعزيز للخبرات العمليه ونبني قدرات الباحث الاردني، وبالعكس يعني انه بضل يعني الخبير لما يجي بضل اسبوع اسبوعين شهر يعني لمده محدده، بس الباحث بضله موجود وبيساعد المصانع الاردنيه عبال لا ينجزوا المشروع. بال 2017 حكومتنا الأردنية وقعت اتفاقية مع حكومة المملكة المتحدة عشان ينشئوا صندوق نيوتن خالدي فاند. والهدف كان إنه نبني قدرات البحث والإبداع في الأردن، بالإضافة إلى دعم التطبيقات العلمية في مشاريع التنمية ودعم الإبداع بما يحقق الأثر التنموي الشامل. هذا هو كان هدف الصندوق. لما الحكومة وقعت هذه الاتفاقية، الصندوق كان أول بارتنر أردني بيوقع اتفاقية شراكة مع الرويال أكاديمي أوف إنجينيرينج عشان ننفذ برنامج اسمه برنامج الشراكة ما بين الصناعة والأكاديمية. نفذنا هذا الهدف. طبعا كان إنه إحنا بدنا نعزز البحث والابتكار ونطور التعليم الهندسي بما يخدم الصناعة الوطنية. طبعا وقعنا الاتفاقية لمدة 2 سنين بتمويل مشترك ما بيننا وبين الأكاديمية من خلال الصندوق طبعا، ودعمنا تقريبا 12 مشروع أول 2 سنين. هذا البرنامج اتطور عشان إنه شفنا إنه إحنا إذا ضفنا بارتنرز أكثر للكونسورتيوم إنه إحنا بنقدر نحقق ونعالج التحديات التنموية تاعتنا بشكل أفضل. فصار إنه إحنا زدنا قيمة الدعم للمشروع، بدل 50,000 صار 80,000، وبعدين زدنا الكونسورتيوم ممبرز، إنه إحنا أعطينا فرصة للحكومات، للNGOs، ستارت أبس، طبعا بالإضافة الكور كانوا الجامعات والصناعة، إنهم كلهم يكونوا يشتغلوا مع بعض عشان إنه يعملوا إمباكت أعظم من خلال هذا البرنامج. واحنا اليوم موجودين بسبب من وحده، يعني هي هذا المشروع واحده من المشاريع اللي اندعمت من خلال الTSP. يعني خلال ال4 سنين اللي ماضيين احنا تقريبا دعمنا 27 مشروع، اظن القيمه 1.8 مليون. البرنامج الثالث اللي نفذناه مع الأكاديمية هو برنامج اسمه Leaders in Innovation Fellowships Program. هذا بتعلق بالنشاط الثاني من نشاطاتنا اللي هو بناء القدرات. إنه إحنا عم نشجع دكاترة الجامعات والانتربرنورز اللي الباك جراوند تبعهم انجينيرينج واللي عندهم ستارت ابس بيست اون تكنولوجي، انه كيف يشتغلوا ويطوروا البزنسز هاي وتصير يعني يمشوا لقدام. هلا هذا البرنامج مدته كان سنه، تقريبا 24 شخص يعني اشتركوا بهذا البرنامج، كل يعني على مجموعتين. كانوا تقريبا 6 ستات و18 دكاترة جامعات ومهندسين. وبصراحة هذا البرنامج كان من أحسن البرامج اللي إحنا نفذناها، لأنه الإمباكت شفناه على المستوى الشخصي لكل واحد من الشباب المشاركين بهذا البرنامج، واللي هم يعني أخذوا تدريب على مستوى يعني 1 to 1، وبعدين صاروا ممبرز بالرويال أكاديمي أوف إنجينيرينج انتربرايز هاب، اللي هو فيه انوفيترز من 17 دولة في العالم، فيه بزنس مان، فيه صناعة، فيه يعني هم يعني بيعطوهم دائما بيعملوا اكتيفيتيز انهم يختلطوا مع هدول فوق اكثر من 1000 انوفيتر، انهم يشبكوا مع بعض ويشتغلوا مع بعض. واحنا يعني شبابنا اللي كانوا مشاركين يعني كثير اشتغلوا ايام الكوفيد وعملوا تيستس يعني مع نظرائهم اللي موجودين في دول ثانيه، لانه شويه كانت الامور صعبه، يعني التواصل والفحوصات والمختبرات كانت مسكره وهيك، فكثير تعاونوا مع بعض وتوصلوا لنتائج كثير حلوه. وهلا واحده من المشاريع عندنا اللي هي عملناها وقت مبادرة جائحة كورونا، اللي هو الماوث ووش سانيتايزر، هلا صار برودكت وهلا راح ينزل على السوق، يعني فيري سون راح نعلن النتائج. طبعا احنا هاي المبادرة عملناها خلال جائحة الكورونا من البيت طبعا، يعني it was very challenging لأنه إحنا ما كنا مهيئين بالمرة بصراحة، واللوك داون صار هيك فجأة. بس يعني دعمنا مشاريع كلياتها عملت سجلوا فيها الشباب براءات اختراع وصارت برودكتس وراح تنزل على السوق إن شاء الله. وأخيراً عنا برنامج الأمن الغذائي. برنامج الأمن الغذائي كمان من التجربة اللي إحنا مرينا فيها بجائحة كورونا، لاحظنا إنه قديش إحنا لازم نشتغل على هذا الموضوع، قديش لازم ندعم صناعاتنا الوطنية في خصوص في قطاع الصناعات الغذائية، لأنه شفناهم قديش اشتغلوا خلال الجائحة وقديش إنهم يعني رفضوا السوق المحلي، وما يعني فيش حدا شكى إنه صار عندنا مشاكل. فهذا البرنامج وقعنا اتفاقية مع وزارة الصناعة والتجارة. الكول الدوكيومنت هلأ جاهزة، بس بدها اجتماع مجلس إدارة عشان يعطونا الجرين لايت وعشان نطلقه. So very soon رح نطلق الكول، ونستنى يعني من الجميع مشاريع حلوة عشان يستفيدوا من هذا البرنامج. وشكرا كثير لكم، يعطيكم ألف عافية.
Thank you, Mrs. Rima. So I want to call upon Mrs. Muna to have her words, please. I think you're with us virtually. Mrs. Muna.
Yes, صباح الخير.
صباح النور. تفضلي.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to welcome our guest from the UK. And if that's okay, I will be speaking in Arabic, and I trust that you have the interpretation needed in hand. السلام عليكم جميعاً. بشرفني كثير إني أكون موجودة معكم ولو مرئياً. وهي بصراحة بنقدر نحكي واحدة من الإيجابيات اللي تعلمناها من المنحة اللي مرقنا فيها، وهي كيف إنه نستخدم التكنولوجيا لصالحنا حتى نتفادى أي توقفات للأنشطة اللي بدنا نعملها. بداية بدي أشكر الجمعية العلمية الملكية، أحد الشركاء الرئيسيين لصندوق نيوتن خالدي، لدعمهم الدائم ومشاركتهم الفعالة. وبدي أشكر الدكتور مؤيد السيد للدعوة ولإتاحة الفرصة للصندوق بأنه يكون جزء من برنامج اليوم. أنا اسمي منى زقصا، وأنا مديرة صندوق نيوتن خالدي في السفارة البريطانية. مثل ما تفضلت مهندسة ريما، الصندوق تم إطلاقه سنة 2017 خلال المؤتمر العالمي للعلوم تحت رعاية ستي الأميرة سمية، وتم توقيع مذكرة تفاهم بين وزارة الأعمال والطاقة والاستراتيجية الصناعية في المملكة المتحدة مع وزارة التخطيط والتعاون الدولي في الأردن. هاي السنة بيكون الصندوق صار له 5 سنين من سنة إطلاقه، واليوم حابة أشارككم 5 حقائق أو معلومات عن الصندوق. أول شغلة إنه هذا صندوق نيوتن خالدي يعتبر أول شراكة بحثية ثنائية، يعني كان ممكن إنه الأردنيين يشتغلوا مع نظرائهم البريطانيين لكن ضمن برامج أخرى، بس كشراكة ثنائية كان الصندوق نيوتن خالدي هو الأول من نوعه. خدم الصندوق العديد من الشراكات اللي كونها الأردنيين سواء من خلال رحلاتهم الدراسية أو من خلال عملهم في بريطانيا. ثاني شغلة اللي هي تسمية الصندوق، مثل ما أنتم ملاحظين الصندوق هو مسمى تيمنا بالدكتور أسامة الخالدي. دكتور أسامة الخالدي هو عالم الكيمياء الحيوية الأردني اللي ألهم أجيال من العلماء العرب، مش بس بالأردن بس برضو بالمنطقة. الهدف من تسمية الصندوق باسم عالم أردني وعربي هي للدلالة على الشراكة الثنائية والمتوازية سواء في إدارة البرامج والنشاطات أو في المخرجات والنتائج. ومن العرض اللي قدمته المهندسة ريما برضه هي حكت على موضوع إنه رح يصير في شركات جديدة تأسست أو رح يتم تتجير أفكار بحثية، وهي كلها رح يكون موجودة في الأردن. فهذا واحد من الأمثلة على كيف إنه هاي الشراكة الثنائية رح تكون بالفائدة للجهتين. والشغلة الثالثة اللي هي المواضيع اللي تطرق لها صندوق نيوتن خالدي. هلا حكينا انه الصندوق تسمى على اسم دكتور اسامه الخالدي، وكان دكتور اسامه له اهتمامات متنوعه خلينا نحكي. فكان له الاهتمامات من المجالات العلميه والببليكيشنز اللي عملها، بس برضه كان له اهتمامات بالفنون وبالتحديد الخط العربي وفن تشكيل النحاس. وبنفس المنهجيه صندوق نيوتن خالدي كمان تطرق لمواضيع مختلفه. فكان عندنا 6 مجالات رئيسية للصندوق، وهي الطاقة، الغذاء، المياه كتحديات بتواجه الأردن، تطبيقات تكنولوجيا النانو، وكان أيضا في عندنا مشاريع في مجال التراث الثقافي، وأخيرا المجالات الإبداعية يعني خلينا نحكي كانت المظلة الأوسع والأجمل اللي كان تحتيها أفكار مختلفة. من سنة 2017 أطلق الصندوق 9 برامج مختلفة. هاي البرامج كانت تندرج تحت 3 محاور أساسية من محاور صندوق نيوتن. هاي المحاور هي بناء قدرات الأفراد، هاي 1، 2 المشاريع البحثية، و3 اللي هو محور ترجمة الأبحاث إلى أفكار ريادية. وأحد الأمثلة على المحور الأخير هو برنامج تغيير الأنظمة من خلال الشراكات، أو اللي هو Transforming Systems Through Partnership، واللي مشروع اليوم يعتبر أحد ثمار هذا البرنامج. هذا النوع من البرامج بسعى أنه يكون شراكات بين القطاع الأكاديمي والقطاع الصناعي مع الجهات اللي بده يكون لها تأثير على المجتمعات لتوسعة نطاق الأثر للمشاريع. والشريك الرئيسي أو الشريك اللي بيعمل على تطبيق هاي البرامج هو صندوق دعم البحث العلمي، دعم البحث والتطوير في الصناعة بقيادة مهندسة ريما راس. 5 معلومة عن الصندوق هي أنه خلال هذه ال5 سنين دعمنا 71 مشروع مختلف تحت المحاور المختلفة. هدول ال71 مشروع كانت بقيادة 65 باحث وباحث أردنيين، وهاي القيادات اختلفت بين طبعاً ذكور وإناث، بس بحب أنوه أنه كانت نسبة مشاركة الباحثات الأردنيات هاي المشاريع أكثر من 21%، وهي نسبة إحنا بنفتخر فيها، خاصة إنه ما كانت شرط أساسي أو ما كانت هي السبب لأنه وجود هذه النسبة من المشاركة، لكن بشكل عفوي كانت نسبة المشاركين الإناث قوية وفعالة بالصندوق. فهاي بشكل عام المعلومات الأساسية عن الصندوق، واللي هي بتتوافق مع عمر الصندوق في الأردن. وهاي الرحلة ال5 سنين للصندوق بيّنت إنه دور صندوق نيوتن خالدي ما كان بس لتوفير دعم شراكات بحثية علمية، ولكن أدى إلى تغيير منهجيات وأساليب بحثية، وهذا الإشي اللي إحنا بنفخر فيه. وهذا الحكي تم من خلال بناء الشراكات اللي كانت تصب في مواجهة وتقديم حلول أمام التحديات التي تواجه الأردن، وهذا الحكي كان قائم خلال القيام ببناء قدرات العلماء والباحثين للمساهمة في بناء اقتصاد الأردن. الصندوق كان منصة لخدمة العديد من الشراكات اللي كونها الأردنيين مع نظرائهم في المملكة المتحدة، وما وقف دور الصندوق على دعم الباحثين من خلال الدعوات التي أطلقتها البرامج، بس برضو كان الصندوق يعمل كنقطة اتصال لمشاركة جميع الفرص اللي كانت تقدمها المؤسسات البريطانية البحثية المشاركة مع الصندوق، واللي كان يتم مشاركتها من خلال نشاطات الصندوق. أحد الأمثلة على هذه الفرص كانت جائزة خريج بريطانيا للمجلس الثقافي البريطاني. هي مش نشاط لنيوتن خالدي، لكن المجلس الثقافي البريطاني واحد من الشركاء الرئيسيين لصندوق نيوتن خالدي، فإحنا قمنا بالإعلان عن هذه الجائزة لخريجين صندوق نيوتن. وأحد الفائزين بالفئة العلمية والإبداعية للجائزة كان الدكتور مؤيد السيد، اللي هو القائم على المشروع اللي جمعنا اليوم. مثل هذا المثال في أمثلة كتير، من حيث إنه خريجين مشاريع نيوتن خالدي قدروا إنهم يحصلوا على فرص تانية من خلال المؤسسات البريطانية المشاركة في صندوق نيوتن خالدي. وهاي الأمثلة هي دليل على دور المملكة المتحدة في استثمار الطاقات البحثية الأردنية واستدامة أي نوع من النشاطات اللي بتم إطلاقها بالشراكة مع الأردن. ما بدي أطول عليكم، بتمنى كل التوفيق للدكتور مؤيد والزملاء في استكمال نشاطات المشروع بشكل عام وورشة عمل اليوم، والتوفيق للجميع، وشكرا كثير لكم.
يعطيك العافية. شكرا سيدة منى. Okay, I would like to call upon Engineer Maha Muayta, the Director of Policies and International Cooperation at the Ministry of Environment.
صباح الخير، يعطيكم العافية وشكرا على عقد هاي الورشة ووجود ممثلين من القطاع العام والخاص وبالجمعية العلمية الملكية بأكد دائما على التشاركية بين الجميع، وهذا الهدف من أي مشروع أو من أي شغل إحنا عم نشتغله سواء بالقطاع العام أو بالخاص. ومرحب فيكم أكيد اليوم، وأنا سعيدة إنه عم بشوف ناس أول مرة بشوفهم زي ما حكت زميلتنا بعد انقطاع فترة من الكورونا، وإن شاء الله خلص إنه هاي المرحلة تعدي وترجع الحياة طبيعية. بدي أحكي لكم بس بمختصر عن الخطة التنفيذية للنمو الأخضر اللي أطلقتها وزارة البيئة بسنة 2020. هي بتغطي السنوات من 2021 ل 2025. نرجع شوي بالهيستوري كيف بلشنا احنا نشتغل او مفهوم النمو الأخضر يدخل بسياساتنا واستراتيجياتنا. بسنة 2010 كان في دراسة سكوبينج ستادي عقدتها وزارة البيئة مع برنامج الأمم المتحدة للبيئة، حددوا القطاعات ذات الأولوية التي يجب العمل عليها في موضوع الاقتصاد الدائري وفي موضوع النمو الأخضر. تم تحديد 6 قطاعات: الطاقة، المياه، النفايات، السياحة، النقل والزراعة. طلعت هاي الدراسة لكن كانت صماء، ما كان فيها إجراءات تنفيذية. فبسنة 2013 كان في بحث على آليات تنفيذ هاي الدراسة وآليات تمويلية وتحفيز القطاع الخاص، تحفيز البنوك، وأيضا إدماج هذا المفهوم بالخطط الوطنية والاستراتيجيات. بسنة 2014 كان في قفزة نوعية بالأردن بهذا الموضوع. تشكلت عندنا برئاسة الوزراء لجنة توجيهية للنمو الأخضر برئاسة معالي وزير البيئة وعضوية عدد من أصحاب المعالي الوزراء والقطاع الخاص. أيضا تشكلت وحدة للنمو الأخضر في وزارة البيئة، وصارت الأردن كمان انضمت للمعهد العالمي للنمو الأخضر اللي هو الشريك الاستراتيجي لوزارة البيئة في إعداد الخطة الوطنية للنمو الأخضر. بسنة 2015 تم إعداد البرنامج الوطني للنمو الأخضر لوزارة البيئة، وهذا البرنامج تم إدراج مخرجاته برؤية الأردن 2025 اللي تم إطلاقها بسنة 2015، ولأول مرة كان بيتم ذكر الاقتصاد الأخضر بشكل صريح في الخطط الوطنية. بسنة 2016 و2017 بلشنا نشتغل على رود ماب أو خطة وطنية للنمو الأخضر. هاي الخطة كانت تم إعدادها بالتعاون مع الجميع، كان في جلسات تشاورية مختلفة على مدار سنة ونص أو سنتين، لطلعنا بنهاية 2017 بخطة وطنية للنمو الأخضر اللي هي سميناها إحنا الرود ماب. نفس الشيء استهدفت ال6 قطاعات اللي نتجت عن الدراسة اللي صدرت بال2010. زي ما حكينا رود ماب ما كان فيها اكتيفيتيز، ما كان فيها اكشن بلانز، ما كان فيها انترفنشنز يجب انه اعدادها او تنفيذها لنوصل بالاردن او لنتحول تدريجيا للنمو الاخضر. بلشنا بعدين نشتغل على اكشن بلانز للقطاعات ال6 اللي تم استهدافها بالرود ماب، وزي ما حكينا نفس الشيء في عدد كبير من الموجودين كانوا اعضاء باللجان الفنيه اللي اعدت هاي الخطط التنفيذيه. بسنه 2020 بشهر 7 واحنا في زي ما نحكي بعز الكورونا كان في اطلاق لهي للخطه، بمعنى انه حتى بفتره الكورونا حتى بفتره الحظر الشامل بنشكر كمان جميع الشركاء كانوا دائما اجتماعات الاونلاين لحتى صدرت هاي الاستراتيجيه بسنه 2020 الخطط التنفيذيه. الخطة التنفيذية للنمو الأخضر فيها 5 أهداف وطنية. الهدف الأول هو أنه نعزز الموارد الطبيعية، نحافظ على الموارد الطبيعية الموجودة عندنا. ما بدنا زي ما بنحكي انه احنا نعمل اقتصاد بضر بالبيئه، بنفس الوقت احنا ما بدنا نوقف الاستثمار او الاقتصاد لصالح البيئه، بدنا نحاول نعمل هذا التوازن بين الموضوعين. يكون في عندنا اقتصاد مستدام اخضر، بمعنى انه مشاريعنا تكون خضراء، الانبوت والاوتبوت او الاوتكمز من المشاريع او الاقتصاد، المشاريع الاقتصاديه تكون خضراء، ونعزز الاستثمار ايضا بالقطاع الصناعي بشكل بيئي. ايضا يكون في عندنا سوشيال ديفلوبمنت وبوفرتي ريدكشن. هاي الخطه التنفيذيه ايضا شملت انه يكون في انجيجمنت للومن، جندر مينستريمينج، يكون في عندنا جرين جوبز، يكون في عندنا ايضا خلق فرص للشباب للاستثمار والعمل على تنفيذ هاي المشاريع ودمجهم ايضا بهاي المشاريع. يكون في عندنا كفاءة الموارد. يمكن هذا كمان بالشغل اللي عم نشتغله احنا كمان بمشروع ميدتست مع الجمعية العلمية الملكية، واحنا بوزارة البيئة دائما بندعو انه يكون في عندنا كفاءة للموارد، استهلاك الموارد بشكل طبيعي، يكون عندنا sustainable consumption and production. والهدف الأخير يكون في عندنا كمان الكلايمت تشينج، حديث الساعة، أكبر شيء عم نلمس أثره هلأ بموضوع البيئة، سواء بالأدابتيشن أو الميتيجيشن. زي ما حكينا كانت ل6 قطاعات، وكانت الخطط التنفيذية بتشمل 86 أكشنز. إذا بدنا نحكيهم بشكل مختصر، بقطاع الزراعة كان في عندنا 14 أكشن. لما بحكي أكشن أو انترفنشن بيشملوا بوليسي، تشريعات، بيشملوا ايضا مشاريع. هاي مشاريع في بعضها لها كونسبت نوت واضح، في بعض المشاريع البروبوزال جاهز، لكن الكلفه الاجماليه للخطط السته هي 1.8 مليار دولار، فرقم كثير كبير. احنا هلا بوزاره البيئه عم نعمل ترويج او تسويق لهاي الخطط مع القطاع الخاص داخل البلد، وبنعملها كمان ايضا مع الدونرز، مع الجهات التنفيذيه الدوليه. لما بنحكي الاجريكلتشر بتكلف تقريبا 193 مليون، او بقطاع الطاقه 12 انترفنشن او اكشن، السياحه 12، النقل 13، النفايات او اداره النفايات 16، والووتر 19 اكشن. وزارة البيئة طبعا لما حطت هدول الأكشن ما كان هو دور وزارة البيئة لحالها، جميع العاملين بالقطاع الزراعي سواء زي ما حكينا القطاع الخاص أو القطاع الحكومي، جلسنا على طاولة ناقشنا الأولويات الوطنية. الحلو بالموضوع إنه هي الأولويات اللي انحطت بهاي المشاريع كانت هي منبثقة من الناس اللي عم تشتغل بالموضوع، اللي عارفة شو همها وعارفة شو احتياجاتها لحتى نوصل لنمو أخضر، وعارفين تقريبا الكلف التقديرية لهاي المشاريع. بعد ما صدرت هاي الخطة التنفيذية تم تعميمها أيضا من رئاسة الوزراء، ودعوة جميع القطاعات، جميع المؤسسات الحكومية على إدراج الأولويات اللي تم إدراجها بالخطة التنفيذية بخططهم الوطنية، وأيضا بالموازنات العامة، بالبرنامج التنموي التأشيري اللي بيتم إعداده من خلال وزارة التخطيط. حتى أنا أحكي للجهات الدولية هاي المشاريع هي أولوياتي أنا كدولة، هي اللي أنا بدي أشتغل عليها لأوصل لنمو أخضر مستدام. أهمية الخطط التنفيذية اللي صدرت إنه يكون في عنا مين ستريم للجرين جروث والكلايمت تشينج، ويكون عنا تنمية مستدامة، نوصل لتحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة 2030. دورنا بالأردن بتنفيذ هذه الأهداف. يكون في عنا كمان تعزيز الكروس سيكتور كولابوريشن بين القطاعات، ما يكون في عنا كل مؤسسة عم تشتغل لحال، نحكي مياه لحال، زراعة لحال. هذا كله يعني كل هاي المواضيع أصلا بتصب أيضا في حماية البيئة. لازم نرجع نحكي مع بعض، لازم نكون عارفين شو أولوياتنا، لازم كل مؤسسة تكون عارفة شو دورها بهاي الخطط التنفيذية. كمان يكون في تأكيد على أهمية البيئة أو محور البيئة بالنمو الاقتصادي. ما بدنا زي ما حكينا انه نهمل الجانب البيئي. احنا هلا عم نشوف كلنا، يعني احنا للاسف عم نستهلك، ما عم نفكر بالاجيال القادمه. هذا الشيء لازم يكون شيء اساسي، لانه احنا ما عندنا الا كوكب واحد، واليوم العالمي للبيئه ب5/6 بيأكد على انه احنا ما عندنا الا كوكب واحد، هذا الكوكب الوحيد اللي احنا رح نعيش عليه، فلازم يكون دورنا هلا سواء لنا او حتى لاولادنا للاجيال القادمه نحافظ عليه، نحافظ على الموارد الطبيعيه. هلا كيف صار ادماج للجرين جروث بالناشونال بلاننج سيستم بالمستوى الحكومي؟ زي ما حكينا كانت عندنا الرود ماب صدرت بال 2017، بعدين صار عندنا الجرين جروث ناشونال اكشن بلان للقطاعات السته. هاي القطاعات شو عم تحتوي الخطط التنفيذيه؟ عم تحتوي على مشاريع خضراء، عم بتعزز او بتقوي المحور البيئي او الدور البيئي بالاستثمار، عم تخلق فرص ايضا لسمول ميديوم انتربرايزز ديفلوبمنت بروجكت، وبيكون في عندنا جرين امبلويمنت اوبورتونيتيز. احنا عم نحكي هلا عن رياده خضراء، ما بدنا نحكي لشبابنا انه ضلوا استنوا بس الوظيفه الحكوميه، لا، هاي الخطط فيها مجال للشباب انه يمسكوها ويشتغلوا على بروبوزلز، وكمان في قدره انه نشبك هدول الشباب مع المؤسسات الدوليه ببروبوزلز واضحه، ويكون عندنا خلق فرص عمل خضراء للشباب. كمان يكون في عندنا تعزيز لتغيير السلوك بشكل عام. هو دور حمايه البيئه لا مش دور وزاره البيئه الحال او وزاره المياه، اذا بدنا نحكي عن حمايه المياه هو دور جميع افراد المجتمع. حاولنا نعمل تشبيك بين الجرين جروث ناشونال اكشن بلان والناشونال ديترميند كونتريبيوشن انديسيز اللي اطلقتها وزاره البيئه. الاردن التزمت بتخفيض ما نسبته 31% من انبعاثات الكربون بحلول عام 2030، او تسلمت هاي الوثيقه لسكرتارية اتفاقيه التغير المناخي. 5% من هذه الانبعاثات هو واجب وطني على الأردن، يجب توفير التمويل المحلي سواء من القطاع الخاص أو من موازنة الحكومة لتنفيذ هذه المشاريع. و26% من هذه الانبعاثات هو مشترطة أو مشروطة بتوفر التمويل الدولي. احنا بالاردن دوله متاثره وليست دوله مؤثره بالتغير المناخي. نسبه الانبعاثات عندنا اقل من 1% من الانبعاثات العالميه، فيجب على المجتمع الدولي انه ياخذ دوره ويقوم بدوره ويساعد الدول الناميه على التكيف والتخفيف من انبعاثات الكربون. الكلفة الإجمالية لل 31% إذا بدنا نخفضهم هي 7.5 يعني 7.5 مليار دولار، كمان رقم كبير. بنحكي عن 7.5 منهم جزء حاولنا نشبك المشاريع الموجودة بالناشونال اكشن بلانز مع المشاريع الموجودة بالناشونال ديترميند كونتريبيوشن. احنا في عنا هلا سياسة للتغير المناخي، عنا خطة وطنية للتكيف مع آثار التغير المناخي. عم نشتغل حاليا على الجي سي اف كونتري بروجرام لسه ما اطلقناه او ما اعلناه. صار عملنا ميرج بين المشاريع الموجوده بالانديسيز والمشاريع الموجوده بالجرين جروث ناشونال اكشن بلان. هلا بصفي دور المؤسسات تكون قادره على انها تحاول انه توفر التمويل وكمان انها تنفذ هاي المشاريع. عشان هيك احنا بنضل ناكد على كل المؤسسات الحكوميه انه المشاريع اللي تم ادراجها بالخطه الوطنيه للنمو الاخضر او بالانديسيز لازم تكون هي مدرجه بموازناتها العامه، تكون هي مدرجه باولوياتها الوطنيه، لانه انا ما بقدر اطلع وثيقه للمجتمع الدولي احكي له هي اولوياتي بالزراعه وتروح وزاره الزراعه تحط اولويات ثانيه او وزاره المياه. فلازم دائما يكون هذا النتوركينج بين المؤسسات، لازم هذا يكون دائما التشاركيه بين المؤسسات، خصوصا فيما يتعلق بالتغير المناخي. عم تيجي احيانا منح وعم بيجي تمويل كثير للبلد في موضوع التغير المناخي، لكن ما عم بيروح بالمجال الصح، يعني ما عم بيتم تنفيذ المشاريع اللي اثرها مباشر بيلمسه المواطن. فهذا دورنا احنا كمؤسسات. الجرين جروث ناشونال اكشن بلان هي متوافقه مع العديد من اهداف التنميه المستدامه، مع 12 مع الهدف 12 اللي هو سستينبل كونسمبشن اند ريدكشن، مع الكلايمت تشينج، مع الناتشورال ريسورسز، كمان الهدف 8 و9 مع التشاركيه. فحاولنا انه بقدر المستطاع نكون احنا متوافقين مع الاهداف العالميه اللي احنا بالاردن اصلا عم نسعى لتحقيقها، عشان نكون كلياتنا بنحكي بلغه واحده. هلا في المستقبل احنا هلا حكينا اطلقنا الخطه الوطنيه وحدثنا الناشونال ديترميند كونتريبيوشن. هلا بال 2025 بده ينعمل ريفيو او ايفالويشن للي صار بالسنوات القادمه، وبده يرجع ينعمل تحديث للخطه الوطنيه. ان شاء الله ان شاء الله ان شاء الله الايفالويشن اللي بده يكون بال 2026 يكون ايجابي، نكون احنا استطعنا انه ننفذ يعني جزء من ما نحلم او ما نصبو اليه من الجرين جروث ناشونال اكشن بلان. وبالتالي بال 2030 بنكون ان شاء الله قادرين على انه تحقيق التزاماتنا باهداف التنميه المستدامه. هاي شوي السلايد عم تحكي عن كيف كان الكروس سيكتور كولابوريشن بين المؤسسات. بتشوفوا كانوا شركائنا من الان جي اوز، المجتمع، المؤسسات المجتمع المدني، المؤسسات الدوليه، القطاع الحكومي. كان في لجنه فنيه وكان في زي حكينا لجنه توجيهيه بالرئاسه، كانوا معنا القطاع الخاص شريك اساسي ايضا باعداد هاي الخطه. هي نفس الشيء عم نحكي عن التكنيكال كوميتي، يمكن هلا مش دور انه نشرحها، بس انه بنبين فيها المؤسسات اللي كانت شريكه معنا والكروس كاتنج بينها وكيف كانت آلية تنفيذ او اعداد الخطه. هلا كل اكشن بالخطه التنفيذيه كان بيشمل، كان عنده باك جراوند كونتكست ببين اهميه هذا الانترفنشن او الاكشن، ليش بدي اخذه، اذا كان في مشاريع سابقه او قصص نجاح بدي ابني عليها، مدى جاهزيه هذا الاكشن للتنفيذ، الكلفه الاجماليه او التقديريه، ايش في ممكن يكون ان كان كونتريبيوشن من المؤسسات، شو مستواه على الاولويات الوطنيه. هلا دور وزاره البيئه، احنا وزاره البيئه زي ما بتعرفوا هي جهه اشرافيه، جهه رقابيه، دورنا وضع الخطط والسياسات والاستراتيجيات، هي مظله البيئه. بصفي دورنا انه احنا نشتغل مع المؤسسات او القطاع ذات العلاقه بكيفيه تنفيذ او توفير التمويل ايضا لتنفيذ هاي المشاريع. دورنا بالامبلمنتيشن تراكينج للمشاريع الوارده بالخطط التنفيذيه. دورنا انه نشبك ما بين هاي المؤسسات الحكوميه او القطاع الخاص مع الدونرز والجهات الدوليه. دورنا كمان تحقيق التواصل، وايضا بناء قدرات المؤسسات فيما يتعلق بقدرتها على تنفيذ الانترفنشنز الوارده بالخطط التنفيذيه. شكرا. اذا في اي سؤال ان شاء الله ما اكون اطلت عليكم.
يصير ان شاء الله. شكرا. يعطيك العافيه مهندس. Just to recap, and this shows the role of the Ministry of Environment, and it's a very, very critical role in trying to set up the foundation for a lot of projects to be implemented on a national level. Policies and regulations are important for inclusiveness, and that's why their role is very important and appreciated. I would like to call upon Dr. Al-Muayyad Sayyid, the Director of the Water, Environment and Climate Change Center, and the principal investigator of this project, as in the title.
Good morning. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم. شرفتونا. Allow me to speak in English, if you don't mind. Can I? Okay, that's fine. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to just to put you in the context of this workshop. This workshop, in fact, comes as part of our project with Royal Academy of Engineering and in collaboration with the University of the West of England in Bristol and IDF from Higher Council of Science and Technology and Newton Khalid Fund, of course. The title of this project this is the original title. It's Integrating and Digitizing Resource Efficient Cleaner Production, RCP, in food industries towards circular economy in Jordan. And one may ask, well, why of that? Why you are like talking about this topic? Why of circular economy? We've been using linear economy and we're fine with it. We've been producing, I would say, a good income and we live with it and that's it. Why we are going to circular economy and why we are tackling this topic? Well, just like a little bit introduction background about CO2 emission. The latest IPCC report about climate change says that, I need to quote, says that today the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere has reached a higher level than at any other time in the previous 800,000 years. And you see 800,000 years, and you see the dramatical increase, the exponential increase, in fact, the exponential increase of CO2 emission over the last 50 years. And one may ask, well, okay, so what? CO2 emission, increasing CO2 emission. We live with high concentration of CO2 emission, and that's fine. But I would like to draw your attention that increasing CO2 emission would result in, would result in increasing of global temperature. And again, so what? If CO2 emission increases and the global temperature increases accordingly, so what? We will fix more conditions, ACs, and that's fine. And we'll live with high concentration of CO2 emissions. I would like to draw your attention that increasing 1 to 2 degrees centigrade will result in extensive damage or disappearance of coral reef systems. Coral reefs, it is الحيد المرجاني, المرجان. So we will lose our marine ecosystem. Increasing 1.5 to 3 degrees centigrade will result in irreversible melting of the Greenland ice sheets. And this would cause rising of sea level and causing flooding and so on. Increasing 2 to 5 degrees centigrade would result in significant freshwater shortage. And so on. I'm not going to read all of this, but it is mentioned clearly and bluntly in the IPCC report. And if you've looked at the ICC report, the latest one, the language that is used is tough. It is certainly, because of human activities, because of the anthropogenic activities, the atmosphere and the global temperature is rising because of, so the language is quite tough. So that's why we need to take action. We need to take action. And actions, by the way, have to be taken by ministries, by governments, by private sector. We have to work all together, hand in hand, in order to keep the temperature below 1.5 degrees centigrade. By the way, if we take all actions and we followed all measures of controlling CO2 emission, we already done with increasing the global temperature by 1.5 degrees centigrade. So now we need to work together in order not to increase this temperature more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. Okay. So this increasing on temperature would affect our physical systems, our biological systems. Physical systems, you know what do we mean by physical systems? Infrastructure. Our infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings, biological systems, plants, farms, biodiversity, economic system willing to invest, this investment rate and payback period, all of these, economic terminologies. So we need to act. We need to act. That's why we need to shift to circular economy and net zero business. So this has become inevitable, in fact. We need to shift to this path as soon as possible. Okay. And in fact, shifting to circular economy would not only benefit the environment and the ecology and the ecosystem, but also would benefit your business. You will enhance your reputation. You would have stronger risk management plan in place. You would be able to save higher energy, water, and raw materials. And today, my colleagues Jihan and Hussam, they are going to talk about applying resource-efficient, cleaner production in selected industries and how this concept, in fact, benefited the industries in terms of water, energy, and material savings. And increase resilience against future regulations. And I don't know if Omar Abu Eid is here. because he has confirmed his participation. Anyway, but Omar Abaid is from EU delegation in Jordan. And if you've, I don't know if you've come across with EU regulations, now the thing of a green transition and the green products are becoming, as I mentioned, inevitable for EU. So if you'd like to open new markets, if you'd like to improve your income, if you'd like to have like your what we call it, competitive edge, so you need to go through lower environmental footprint and green transition. Increase investors' confidence and stronger focus on innovation. So you need to innovate, how to minimize water, how to minimize energy, how to minimize CO2 emission. So innovation will come up. Okay, why we are here? We're here for these 7 objectives. This is what we call it in academia, learning objectives, learning outcomes. So these are our learning outcomes in this 2-day symposium. So please do attend the 2 days. Today we're going to cover the concept of circular economy. And I'm really glad to have Professor Vikas Kumar. He came from the UK, from the University of West of England, to talk about circular economy and, in particular, circular economy in food industries. And we're gonna have Anatoly from Circular Economy Institute to talk about general concepts about circular economy. So this is a 2-day symposium, and it aims, in fact, to improve your awareness about Jordanian green growth strategy, and I think we've done with that. Maha Ma'aita, thank you, Engineer Maha. Where's Maha? She left. Okay, Maha, thank you, Maha, because in fact she has presented the green growth thoroughly, and she highlighted the main aspects of green growth strategy in Jordan. So we take this off. So better understand the second objective, better understand the concept of circular economy and its implications in food industries. Inshallah, we assure you, we promise you to improve your understanding about circular economy concepts in food industries. I know that some of you are aware of the concept of resource efficient cleaner production, given that we've been working in these concepts for a decade now. But to those who don't know, we aim to increase your knowledge on this concept, resource efficient cleaner production. And in fact, Engineer Hussam and Engineer Jihan, Mus'ab, Omar, they are experts, and of course, Salah and Ahmed. Did I miss somebody? No. Okay, they are experts in this approach. And we're going to introduce some real examples about applying RACP in food industries. So RACP is not like a theoretical, a blue sky terminology. It can be applied. So we have Al-Mazra'a, we have Habiba, we have a couple of industries. They've applied RACP concept, and it has paid off. And they've earned some benefits out of it. Improve knowledge about Industry 4.0 tools, and this is quite new. And by the way, Professor Vikas Kumar is a specialist in Industry 4.0, الثورة الصناعية الرابعة. Industry 4.0 tools, IoT sensors, blockchain, big data, what else? Artificial intelligence, all of this stuff. We're gonna discuss this in line with a green economy. This is a little bit advanced step, but we need to be thinking ahead, in fact. And tomorrow, by the way, inshallah, tomorrow we're gonna discuss this. So please do attend tomorrow, because like most of the time tomorrow will be allocated to discuss this concept, Industry 4.0 in RACP, in resource efficient cleaner production. And interestingly, as part of this symposium, we're going to talk a little bit, this is tomorrow again, we're going to talk a little bit about carbon footprint for your product. How going to estimate what's the importance of calculating your carbon footprint? And last but not least, if time allows, we together we're gonna have a transition plan together in in interactive way towards adopting circular economy and low carbon industry. We're gonna distribute a template and trying to have your own transition green plan. So again, this is the title of our project, Integrating and Digitizing Resource Efficient Cleaner Production, RACP, in food industries towards circular economy in Jordan. We have 4 keywords in this title, don't we? Yes. We have digitizing. We're going to cover this through Professor Kumar and Abdurrahman Habashne. Where's Abdurrahman? He's not here. Abdurrahman Habashne through Decapolis, who's going to talk about the blockchain and how can we integrate the blockchain into our ECP. And resource efficient cleaner production, this is the 2nd keyword in the title, and it's going to be covered by Jihan, Hussam, Mus'ab, Umar, Salah, Ahmed. Food industries, and we're happy to have Fawaz al-Shak'a is going to be covered by Fawaz as well. And circular economy is going to be covered by Professor Kumar and Anatali, who will be joining virtually. 4 keywords, and we promise you we're going to cover all of these words, and we're going to cover all of the objectives and learning outcomes of this symposium. That's all from my side. I will, no, last slide, okay. In fact, the concept of RACP, is nothing but to focus on the concept of decoupling. Decoupling. I don't know if you've come across with the concept of decoupling. Decoupling is to keep your economy growing, to keep your factory industry producing, earning money, improving your income, while reducing your environmental impact. This is decoupling. Decoupling. And we have in the decoupling concept, we have what we call it resource decoupling and impact decoupling. And this is in fact I would say the theoretical rationale behind the concept of RACP and circular economy. Resource use, it is decoupling from the economic activity. What does that mean? Meaning that we would like to get most out of resources, to extract most value of resources. We're not gonna reach to zero. You need resources. You need resources in order to keep your economy growing. But in terms of environmental impact, we need to restore ecosystems. That's why it's complete decoupling. Is it clear? I hope so. Yeah. So this is the concept, in fact, behind the RACP and circular economy, decoupling. Mus'ab. I leave the floor to Mus'ab. Just Mus'ab, because he's following up day-to-day activities with this project. Mus'ab is gonna talk about the project itself, the activities that we're gonna follow in a couple of minutes. Then we'll leave the floor to Fawaz. Then we're gonna have short session for Q&A. Then we're gonna have our coffee break. Coming back, Professor Kumar will talk about circular economy in food industries. Very important topic. And he has come from UK just yesterday, just to talk about this topic. So please do attend. And Anatali will talk about circularity, tough word, circularity in general concepts. And then we'll finish by Jihan and Hussam. They're going to talk about practical examples of applying RACP. As I mentioned, please do attend the 2 days. We're going to distribute certificates signed off by RSS and University of the West of England. So please do attend the two days of this symposium. Thank you so much for coming once again. Please.
السلام عليكم جميعا، يعطيكم العافية. يعني الشباب ما خلولناش وقت كثير نحكي. أنا راح أحاول أن أكون مختصر قدر الإمكان. And allow me to switch to English again. Hello everybody. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the project and its general methodology and the work plan of it. I couldn't agree more with Dr. Moayed and the previous speakers about needing for acting now about everything in environment, and RECP is a tool toward acting. And you can notice now it's summer already. It's not summer yet, but it feels like summer. Now, for our project, RSS is the implementing partner of this project. We work with 3 industries, food industries actually, Al-Mazra'a and Al-Maha and Al-Wadi. Al-Mazra'a is a dairy company and Al-Maha as well a dairy company. However, we work with bottling water factory there, and Al-Wadi is a food product company. With these companies, we try to implement the RECP methodology and test methodology, which is another tool for resource efficient and cleaner production, which is stand for transferring of environmentally sound technologies. And due to the importance of economy, we also use another tool, which is actually combining environment with accounting system, which is material flow cost flow accounting, where we try to monitor the priority areas and the cost centers of the industry. You know, as industry and the decoupling concept that Dr. Moayed mentioned, we need to maintain the economical growth and economic visibility of the industry, and at the same time reduce the environmental impact of this industry. We are through these processes, we try to identify the cost centers and priority areas to work, and also, of course, building a baseline, a benchmark, compare it to the benchmark, the international benchmark with these industries. Actually, it's important to highlight that at these, let's say, methodologies, we try to build a team, a joint team between RSS and the companies that we're working with, because it should be a continuous process. The RECP and material and these environmental methodologies need to be continuous. So we build a culture with these companies and the trained personnel there. Okay. Now it's clear?
I hope so, because I just received a message.
Okay, I can use the microphone if it's... again, we build a team inside the company and train them along with let's say, the consultancy process in order to increase the sustainability of the project. And as we lift when we leave the company, they will still be able to continue this process. And you know, other problems might generate in the future, and the company will be able to handle these issues. Once we identify the cost centers and the priority areas, and generating or identifying the, let's say, components that needed to be monitored by the company, the Decapolis partner is introduced to build the blockchain for online monitoring or giving a real monitoring for the company. And with the Decapolis, we have another partner, which is Qiras, an IoT and digitalization company, which provide real-time sensors for the different components or factors at the industry. And once Decapolis is building their blockchain based on the outcomes of the RECP audit, we try to quantify the benefits by integrating them into a blockchain. And as well, it should be a continuous feedback. Now we have the University of the West of England for knowledge exchange and consultation along the process. And we thank them for this, let's say, support. And as a byproduct as well of the project, we build capacity for the Jordanian University and trying to integrate the RECP methodology into the university curriculums. This is in general what is the project about. Now it's just the activities of the project. Now I'll go through very fast on it. Now we try to collect information with the companies, signing contracts. It's a general, let's say, methodology, and I will not go through a lot with this methodology. Thank you, everybody, and I wish you a very fruitful symposium.
Thank you very much, Musab and Dr. Muayyad, for the general insight about the project and the reason behind this whole event. Just to recap, as we have mentioned, this whole event is about circular economy and the importance of circular economy and the relation between circular economy and digitization, which is a direct relation, because we're talking about eliminating waste. We're talking about switching from make waste to not to waste. Eliminate waste totally from the economy. That's circular economy. And a misconception, which is within the industries that we see, that if you go environmentally friendly, you might not benefit economically. But actually, they are all directly proportional, because nowadays we have compliance objectives and obligations, and also at the same time, the European market or the exporting activities requires us to comply with certain standards that are actually environmentally based. I would like to call upon Engineer Fawaz Shaka, the board member in Jordan Chamber of Industry and JEDCO, to speak about food industry in Jordan, overview and potential of growth. تفضل.
يعطيكم العافية. First, let me welcome our guest, Professor Vikas. We've met online once in a meeting before, and it's a pleasure to meet you in person. وبحب أشكر الجمعية العلمية الملكية اللي دائما دائما انتم سباقين في هالمشاريع العظيمة، والدكتور مؤيد وكل القائمين على المشروع وروافد الجمعية، كوني بشتغل برضو مع ريما في صندوق الصناعة حاليا. يعطيكم العافية. هلا اليوم أنا بدي أحكي بشكل سريع عن قطاع الصناعات الغذائية في الأردن، حتى هيك يكون عندنا فكرة بالأرقام. بعدها بجوز نتكلم على الدايركت ابليكيشنز للسيركلر ايكونومي، مع انه انا مش الخبير اليوم ما شاء الله عنكم يعني. اليوم عم نحكي عن قطاع في له حصة سوقية 65% من السوق الأردني، واللي هو التميز بصراحة انه نلاقي صناعة أردنية عندها حصة أكبر من 50% في سوقها المحلي، بإنتاج تقريبا 4.5 مليار دينار أردني، بشكل 25% من كامل الإنتاج الصناعي في الأردن. عم نحكي عن 6% من الناتج المحلي الأردني، بموجودات assets بقيمة 1.5 بليون JDs. عم نصدر فوق ال 1 بليون دولار، 785 مليون دينار أردني، الحمد لله بزيادة سنوية مستمرة في ال4-5 سنوات الأخيرة، حتى خلال سنة كورونا. بجوز ريما تفضلتي في البرزنتيشن انه اللي كان بيطلع على الأخبار خلال أزمة كورونا، لا انه في بعض الدول في يوروب او في الستيتس كان في انقطاع للمواد الغذائيه او بعض المواد الاساسيه على الارفف. بالاردن ما شفنا هذا الحكي، بجوز لانه حبسونا بالبيوت، بس يعني برضه كان اداء الصناعه مميز. عدد العاملين بشكل مباشر في هذا القطاع 60,000 عامل، طبعا بنمو 14.5%. الحلو في الموضوع انه نمو عدد العاملين في القطاع عندنا اكثر من نمو المبيعات. فانتم عارفين بالاردن عندنا وجع في البطاله، لازم تؤدرست يعني، ونحاول انه نوجد هالوظائف حتى نقدر نشغل ال 120,000 أردني اللي بفوتوا على سوق العمل كل سنة. في عندنا ارتفاع الحمد لله مستمر خلال ال4 سنوات الأخيرة بعدد المنشآت الصناعية، تقريبا بوصلوا 3000 منشأة صناعية في مجال الصناعات الغذائية 2920، بزيادة 15% تقريبا عن قبل 4 سنوات. اليوم عم نطلع انه في عندنا opportunity بالذات في قطاع الصناعات اللي بتعامل مع بالثروه الحيوانيه، سواء هو صناعه الالبان والاجبان اللي هي قطاعي انا، او صناعه اللحوم، الدواجن، حتى المنتجات الزراعيه، بانه نفوت لاسواق مثل اوروبا وامريكا واستراليا. بس احنا عندنا خلينا نحكي مشاكل بالفود تريسابيليتي، واللي هو جزء من الحل طبعا ممكن يكون في الديجيتايزيشن اللي تفضلوا فيه الاخوان حتى نقدر نفوت هاي الاسواق. عندنا دراسه من الورلد تريد سنتر بتقول انه قيمه هاي الاوبورتونيتي اللي رايحه علينا تقريبا 400 مليون دولار سنوي. فبالتالي هي قيمه محرزه وفرصه للتحسن كبيره لقطاع الصناعات الغذائيه. هلا بدي احكي شوي عن شركه البان المزرعه، اللي هي شركتي اللي انا اشتغلت فيها مع الجمعيه العلميه الملكيه سابقا في مشروع سويتش ميد. طبعا انا بلشت دائما بحكيها بكل ايفنت، انا بلشت مش مقتنع بمشروع سويتش ميد، بس اجوني غرفه الصناعه ايام ما كنتش انفولد في غرفه الصناعه، ووقتها مهندسه جيهان، مهندس حسام، والمهندس روز صماضي من عندنا غرفه الصناعه اقنعوني بانه هذا مشروع كويس وجرب وما راح تخسر. طبعا تفاجأت انا انه فعليا حجم السيفنجز السنوي اللي شركتي عملته بحدود 250 ألف دينار سنوي كان من ريسورسز عمالها بتنزل في المصرف. ومش بس هيك، كانت الميزه بصراحه، انا هو وين بلش اعجابي بالجمعيه العلميه الملكيه، الجماعه لزقوا في المصنع عندي، يعني صاروا يتابعوا وينقوا علي بشكل يومي، وين هاي، ليش هاي هيك، طب ليش الشباب ما عدلوا هاي، فصار إلي معلم، صار الشباب في حدا يتابعهم. فشوي شوي مع طول المشروع، لأنه المشروع سنة وسنتين وثلاثة استمر مع المتابعة، صار في تغير في الثقافة عند الموظفين. صار موضوع تهريب البخار هذا مش مقبول، في عندنا تهريب مي بدنا نحله. فصار الطريقة اللي ينظر فيها أي شخص في المؤسسة وأنا من ضمنهم لأي ويست انها مش مقبوله. قبل كنا مبلدين، طبعا هو الاكسرسايز اللي عملوه القياس الاكستنسيف، جابوا اكوبمنت مش موجوده عندنا وكادر مش موجود. يعني الشركات الخاصه كلنا بنعرف انه اندر ستافت، احنا الواحد بكون شايل يعني 10 بطيخات بايدتين فمش ملحق. فوجود دعم بالكادر وبالاكوبمنت ساعدنا بانه احنا نقيس. فاليوم لما الدكتور مؤيد جزارني وحكى لي عن موضوع الديجيتايزيشن، اليوم انتم اخبر مني في موضوع التوتال كواليتي مانجمنت. خلينا نحكي، احنا عندنا العمليه بلان دو تشيك اكت، فكانت هاي البروسيس تاخذ معنا 6 اشهر، يجوا يقيسوا التسريبات او الليكجز في المي او في السوليد ويست او في غيره، وبعديها نحط اكشن بلان ونيجي ننفذها، وبعديها نقيس شو صار في عندنا سيفنجز. بعديها احنا تطورنا، رحنا جبنا باور بي اي سيستم وصرنا نحاول نعمل اوتوميشن لبعض القياسات ونتابعها والى اخره، فصارت البروسيس اسرع. بس برضه مانيولي انتر كل الفايندنجز اللي عندنا. هلا لما اجوا حكوا في الموضوع الاي او تي والديجيتايزيشن، فمعناته هاي السايكل بدل ما هي كانت 6 اشهر صارت 1.5 شهر، هلا ممكن تصير ديلي بيسس او ويكلي بيسس، فعمليه التحسينات بتصير اسرع. احنا بالاردن بنعاني من شغله، احنا الريسورسز عندنا مكلفه. انا بدي اختلف هون مع اللي حكوه زملائي في موضوع انه احنا موضوعنا هذا موضوع كقطاع خاص ايكونوميكال، يعني في فائده بيئيه لا شك انها موجوده، بس اليوم احنا كلفه الطاقه وكلفه المياه وكل الكلف اللي بندفعها كصناعيين عاليه جدا مقارنه بكل دول الجوار. فاليوم احنا مضطرين نوصل لافشنسي عاليه جدا حتى نقدر نحافظ على تنافسيتنا مع دول الجوار ومع الدول اللي بتنافسنا مثل تركيا ومصر وغيره، لانه الريسورسز عندهم رخيصه. بالاضافه للفوائد الاجتماعيه اللي عم نحققها او الفوائد البيئيه، بس اليوم في حاجه ملحه اقتصاديه انه احنا نشتغل على الريسورس افشنسي حتى نقدر نستمر بتنافسيتنا حتى في سوقنا المحلي، لانه اليوم مع محدوديه الدخل كمان المواطن بدور على جيبته وعلى مصلحته، فبهمك انت توفر له سلعه بجوده عاليه لكن كمان بكلفه منطقيه. انا بصراحه دخلت مصانع كثير خارج الاردن، وخليني احكي بتركيا بالذات، تفاجأت من حجم الويست اللي عندهم. يعني وانا ماشي بعد ما تعلمت من جماعه الجمعيه العلميه الملكيه صرت احسب على الاله الحاسبه، بقول لي شو بتحسب وانا ماشي مع صاحب مصنع، بقول له بحسب لك قديش في مصاري في المصرف عندك كل يوم. فتفاجأت انه هم البزنس تبعهم سستينبل بليفل ويست عالي جدا. احنا لو بنعمل هيك بنسكر ونروح. وما زال احنا طبعا عندنا لو هانجينج فروتس، وما زال في مجال انه نحسن اكثر. ف يعني بدي اشكركم مره ثانيه، والله يعطيكم العافيه، وبأكد على أهمية هذا المشروع وقديش ممكن يدفشنا لقدام، بداية في الصناعات الغذائية، وإن شاء الله لاحقا في السيكتورز الثانية. يعطيكم العافية. and you're welcome again. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Fawaz. Just to follow up on what Engineer Fawaz has mentioned, of course, the limited resources, or let's say the expensive resources that we have in Jordan, is an incentive for us to look at circular economy. Because circular economy speaks about closing the loops and not opening the loop as it is. So this will allow us to reuse, refurbish, and keep whatever is there within the system and economy for as long as possible at the highest possible values. So that's why we are introducing circular economy as the main concept, which is now globally being practiced and implemented. And if you look at the European action plans, that's what's the trend right now, and that's what's happening actually. And the Ukraine war was the main incentive for them to push towards circularity more and more. Inshallah, within these 2 day sessions, we'll get you closer to this concept, to understand how it will help the industries and how it will push you more towards a better economical situation, not only environmental status. I would like to invite you now to have either, if you have any questions, so you can shoot at us right now, and we can address it to whoever spoke. And then we have our break, and at 11:30 we'll come. I'll be looking at the chat box also if there is any questions within the virtual application. تفضلوا إذا في حدا عنده سؤال تفضل. هيك clarification هلا. No. And I can't see. في أسئلة.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me also without a microphone. Hello, very nice to be here. My name is Elisabetta from GIZ.
Yes.
Very interesting presentation. I just want to ask...
If you can use the mic so that the virtual...
Yes, I can, okay.
Thank you.
So, hello, nice to be here today. My name is Elisabetta from GIZ. I wanted to ask, how did you define circular economy, for example, in your company, the last gentleman, Al-Masra, and how, can you give us some maybe concrete results of the intervention? What could you save? What could you achieve through it? I don't know if somebody else wants to answer this, like for example on the definition of circular economy, but maybe on the results from the company.
So you want mainly from the company, yeah?
No, whatever you think is best.
Right.
Dr.
Today, thank you. Today, inshallah, afternoon, we're going to talk about circular economy in food industries. What does that mean? So I'm going to leave this to Professor Kuma so in a bit. So would you like to talk a little bit about this? So.
Thank you. I think that's really I would say a helpful question. I think is we're here to talk about circular economy. So I think we need to have a better understanding. I'm certainly going to talk about afterwards in the break, but going back to your question, I think, what Dr. Moed was mentioning earlier, I think even Fawad was mentioning about we're all following the linear economy. So we just take, make, use, and dispose. We don't think about afterwards what happens. And circular economy is more about, not just reducing waste, it's about eliminating waste. So what we can do, what we throw out. And there are lots of fantastic intervention in terms of how in different industry, different sectors, you can use to in a different way. So for example, in food, lots of food waste comes from the household waste, right? And what do? We simply dump, and then I think that creates, of course, impacting on the environment in terms of greenhouse emissions. If we can think more creatively, is something food that we cannot use it. For example, we can use that for the animal feed. Or we can think about some new business model. Can we bring it back into the systems? It's more about circulating that as far as I think, and it's not always 100%, so there will be some waste at the end, but the idea is to to eliminate as much as possible. And if we cannot eliminate it, just think about more creatively, more innovatively, what you can do with that waste. And I'll show you a bit more in my presentation. I think that different companies using different interventions. So one of the, for example, the major waste problem is the plastic waste, right? So we all are talking about plastic waste, how it's kind of polluting our marine environment. We're all consuming. So saying like everybody who eats seafood, we're almost taking about 11,000 particles every year. And that's massive without realizing that one. There are companies now using that sort of plastic waste to convert them into fibers, so using in clothing, in fashion, the other fantastic use as well. So hopefully I think later on when I bring some more evidence and example, that will help you to have a better understanding of what circular economy practices can do. Hope helps. Thank you.
So much. Thank you. Very thorough. Thank you. If you don't mind, Fawaz, we'll talk about Al-Mazra because the question was...
It's more about industry than Al-Mazra, but I can go back to Al-Mazra just to emphasize, to give you some local examples on what the professor mentioned. In Jordan we have, it's across all sectors, but to understand the opportunities that we have in circular economy. We produce 120 tons of textile waste per day. And right now, the issue to recycling this is legislative. We have an international investor that wishes to set up a plant next to Al-Qaeda, but we are unable to get the approval from the Ministry of Environment. I would have loved for her to have stayed to talk about it. We have 200,000 tons in paper waste annually, most of it going to the dumps. We only manufacture the egg plates from it, cardboard for the eggs. Other than that, it's going to dump. Some of it recently was allowed to be exported. It was banned for some time. We have 8,000 tons daily of cow and chicken manure that is being illegally dumped in the Jordan Valley and other areas. We have some fly infestation in the Jordan Valley. If you noticed recently, we're getting some in Amman now, some fly infestations. This can be used to produce heat energy, electric energy, and certain types of fertilizers. And Jordan is perfectly positioned to export fertilizers since we're already exporting chemical fertilizers, so that will be a great opportunity. We have 250,000 pieces of sheepskin and 50,000 pieces of cow skin that we're unable to process, so they get discarded in the dumps. And we import the same skins, a bit more, worth 120 million every year, from overseas. So if we allow the setup of plants to treat those, we will not have to import them and we will get rid of a lot of waste. We've lost a few plants to manufacture silage from fruit and vegetable waste in the Jordan Valley, also because of being unable to license them in the Jordan Valley because it's not an industrial area. So they blocked the license and the plants had to move to Egypt. And now we import their product from Egypt. Yeah. Wow. We have a huge issue with water treatment plants, but I will not get into that. Rima heard a lot about it in the IRDF. There's a lot of smaller scale projects on which circular economy can be effective, but I'll give you a small example from my company. In dairy, we have a huge issue in Jordan that we have no central plant to treat whey, so it's all being illegally discarded into the sewage. And if anybody knows anything about whey is very harmful for the environment. I mean, it's difficult to treat because it destroys the enzymes and the bacteria that treats the water. It's also very corrosive. So we developed a way to reuse that whey because it's full with nutrients, so fat, proteins, and lactose, and to put it back again into some dairy products, like, for example, the drinkable yogurt, which will provide higher nutritional value to the consumer and less waste for our company. And it had some returns for us because when you add water to make stirred yogurt to yogurt, you can add less water than how much whey you can add because of the total solids in the whey. So basically, I hope there is no competition in the room, but it ended up being profitable for the company.
يعطيك العافية. Of course, these insights and notes and facts that Engineer Fawaz has added is very important in our group discussion that's going to follow either today or tomorrow. Just to clarify, after this, the Q&A session and the coffee break, we're going to have a more deep insight on what circularity is, because we need to understand, is circularity recycling? Is circular economy recycling? It's not. So let's see how we're going to discuss further, and how true circular transition will be explained further through Anatari and Dr. Vikas Kumar. We're going to explain that both nutrients, the technical nutrients, the biological nutrients, and the closed loops of all of them, and what are the priorities to actually reach true circularity, hopefully. And remember, design is key. It's not only within the process. We actually look for new companies and industries that design products based on circularity. And that's what will eliminate waste. Okay, any other question? Yes.
I am Engineer Abir Ramadne from Ministry of Industry and Trade. First, I would like to thank the Royal Scientific Society for this important workshop, and to thank Mr. Kumar for his participating in this workshop to introduce more about the circular economy in food industry. My point is that I hope if you link the life cycle assessment and the importance of implementing the life cycle assessment in food industry with the circular economy, because as you know, there are many international standards in the ISO standards relating to the life cycle assessment. So if in the future the industrial factories here in the food sector in Jordan be aware about these important standards, this will help them more and will increase the competitiveness of their businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's true. And actually, LCA is a very, very important part of circularity, because it enhances the analysis and understanding where waste is and quantification of the waste in every specific phase of the production, from cradle to cradle, not to grave. That's circularity. So we're going to discuss further, hopefully, after that. Any questions, please? We still have time, then we can have our coffee break. Yes, تفضل.
السلام عليكم. محمود العمري يعمل بإدارة معاصر الزيتون بالأردن. في عندنا منتجات عرضية تنتج من صناعة استخراج زيت الزيتون، جزء منها صلب وجزء منها سائل اللي هي مياه الزيبار والجفت باللغة المحلية. لا يصنع، غير مصرح بتصريفه، ممنوع الاحتفاظ فيه، لا يوجد مكان مرخص لنقله عليه. المشكلة متروكة من عشرات السنين، ووزارة البيئة روحوا قبل ما احكي. طبعا في مشاريع تعطل بسبب التراخيص. تصنيف استخدامات الأراضي غير مفعل بالأردن. صعب تبدأ اليوم برخصة من وزارة البيئة بمشروع حتى لو كان مختص بمعالجة النفايات، لأن هي بالأخير حتى لو كانت منتج عرضي من منتج زراعي، بالأخير أنا بدي أرخصها كمعمل أو كمشغل لمعالجة نفايات صلبة، وطبعا يمكن الاستفادة منها، وإحنا أصحاب تجربة وشفناها برا وبنشتغلها هون ولكن بدون ترخيص حاليا. هاي نقطة. نقطة ثانية إنه الصناعي الأردني تواجه بعض المشاكل بالأردن، إنه ممكن تبدأ اليوم بهذا المكان وترخص، ما بمنعوا السكن يصير حواليك، وبس يصير حواليك 7 بيوت صار اسمه تجمع سكاني، وصاروا هم أصحاب حق خلينا نقول بإزعاجك كمدير للمشروع من روائح من بالأخير لما نحكي عن إعادة تدوير أو تصنيع بعض النفايات بنتج عنها روائح. طبعا في روائح غير مؤذية، هي بالأخير روائح طبيعية، يعني رائحة مزارع الأغنام والأبقار هي رائحة طبيعية، ولكن البعض إذا بنزعج منها باللحظة اللي بترخص مشروع مفروض إنه يحمى أو يأخذ يكون له أولوية. كنت بتمنى إنه يحضر وزارة البيئة بما يخص هذا الموضوع. طبعا انتم حكيتوا كمان عن مواضيع بتخص الCO2 بالعالم. احنا ما استهلكنا حصتنا ولا صنعنا بعدنا ولا انتجنا CO2 بالعالم، واللي استهلكوا الحصص العالمية مفروض يعوضونا هم اليوم، لأنه احنا تكلفة الصناعة بالأردن معطل جدا جدا جدا. احنا مش قادرين ننافس، وقاعد المستهلك الأردني بيعيش بدخل أردني. الدخل الأردني ما بقدرش أنا أوفر له سلعة بيئيا أنا رقم واحد وعامل بقوانين عالمية بتكون رقم واحد بكل شيء وننتج كل شيء، وهذا اللي بيهمنا. ترى احنا رياديين كصناعيين بالأردن، ولكن هاي التكلفة مش قاعدين بننافس ولا قادرين ننافس. بعض السلع بتيجينا من برا وبندفع عليها جمرك ورسوم وتكلفتها أقل من المنتج المحلي. يعني لازم يكون في وجهة نظر، ما بعرف هل يعني هي دعم برامج منح أو حكومية أو كيف بدها تكون، ما بعرف. الأردن طبعا حقق قصص نجاح إذا بدنا نحكي عن الصناعات الغذائية بشقيه الحيواني والنباتي بالوقت اللي كبر دول العالم وبالصناعة أو بالأموال. الحمد لله احنا بالجائحة قطعنا بدون يعني مرت المرحلة كاملة ما نقصش شيء عنا عن الرف، وبالعكس كانت حتى أسعاره معقولة. وشكرا لكم جميعا، يعطيكم العافية.
وشكرا سيد محمد العمري. وهذا موضوع كثير مهم طبعا، لأنه نحن ما حنطلع we're not gonna look only at الobstacles اللي هي الفنية التكنيكال او انه how we're gonna apply circular economy. لا، نحن بدنا نربط كل شيء، البوليسيز، السوسايتي، الاندستري بلاي ميكرز، شو بيواجهوا من مشاكل. في مشاكل انتم ادرى فيها ونحن على اطلاع عليها طبعا كجمعيه، مش سهله وعويصه. وممكن هاي الفكره ورا السيركل ايكونومي لسه يعني بنحاول ننبه عليها كثير. ان شاء الله حتشوفوا قديش انه ممكن تفيد الصناعات في تقليل استهلاكاتهم بطريقه ذكيه. يعني we can call it a smart management plan، بس بطريقه فنيه جميله ان شاء الله. وهاي الاوبستكلز لازم نذكرها we will note it down، وهاي حتكون من مخرجات اجتماعنا هون، ما حتكون فقط نظريه. حنحط كل هاي النقاط عشان نشوف شو ممكن نحط رود ماب واضح بتعدى كل هاي الاوبستكلز للترو سيركولاريتي، تفيد الصناعه، نوازن بين البيئه والصناعه، ما نشد على الاوبريتنج زون تبع الانفايرمنت اللي نحن كل مره عم نشد عليه. صح الأردن مش أكثر دولة، بس نحن ضمن الريجن، في الآخر الحدود مرسومة بس ضمن الريجن والمصادر كلياتها مشتركة. فإن شاء الله تكون هاي يعني فيها هدف نزيه وجميل it should be an objective, a clear objective to actually have an ethical impact، مش بس environmental، it's an ethical impact for humanity. خصوصا نحن كأردن لنا واجب في هذا الشيء إن شاء الله. تفضل المايك اسمح.
يعطيكم العافية جميعا. أنا المهندس محمد الخالدي، وزارة الصناعة والتجارة، مدير الرقابة والتفتيش في الوزارة. الأخ العمري حكى على نقاط كثير مهمة، بس أنا حاب من خلال عملنا في وزارة الصناعة والتجارة أنا مدير الرقابة والتفتيش على الأنشطة الاقتصادية في الوزارة. بالنسبة للنقطة الأولى اللي حكى إنه في بعض إقامة المنشآت الاقتصادية أو الصناعية بأسلوب عشوائي، ممكن بتصير، بس إحنا في عنا لجنة في وزارة البيئة، لجنة تقييم الأثر البيئي، وإحنا وزارة الصناعة إحنا أعضاء في هاي اللجنة. يعني يمنع ترخيص أي نحكي على المصانع إلا لما يحصل على الموافقة من لجنة تقييم الأثر البيئي. وبالتالي هم أي منشأة صناعية حسب طبيعة المنشأة الصناعية بشوفوا وين الموقع وعرضوها، بيتم منح الموافقة وبكمل إجراءات التسجيل والترخيص والموافقات الأخرى بعد لجنة تقييم الأثر البيئي. يعني حتى يكون في ضبط لموضوع الانتشار العشوائي للمنشآت الاقتصادية وخاصة الصناعية والملوثة للبيئة. في عندنا كمان اللاند يوز بلان، خطة استعمالات الأراضي، وموجودة في وزارة الإدارة المحلية وعند البلديات حتى تنظم عمليات إقامة المنشآت الاقتصادية وخاصة المنشآت الصناعية. موضوع التوازن ما بين الصناعة وبين البيئة، يعني احنا بنعرف انه موضوع المتطلبات البيئية، إذا بدنا نطبق مثلا الآن حاليا في وزارة البيئة بيعملوا بتشريعات بإلزامية المصانع ببعض المبادئ البيئية اللي بتحقق الإنتاج الأنظف ونحو الجرين جروث والاقتصاد الأخضر. ممكن بالبداية إنها هي بتعمل كوست اديشنال كوست على المنشأة، لكن على اللونج تيرم احنا تحسب انه راح تفتح آفاق لهذا القطاع الصناعي، تفتح له أسواق جديدة عالمية صارت تعمل متطلبات التصدير لإلها، انه يكون انت عندك المتطلبات الخضراء اصلا. غرفة الصناعة والRSS الجمعية العلمية الملكية وزارة البيئة في موضوع الإنتاج الأنظف، يعني بلشوا في والأكشن بلان اللي انحكى عنها بموضوع التوعية للقطاع الصناعي تحديدا في هذا الموضوع، أهمية الاستفادة من الإنتاج الأخضر، أهمية الموازنة ما بين الصناعة وبين البيئة. الأستاذ العمري كمان حكى على موضوع الزبار والجفت، إنه في مشكلة كانت زمان في تصريف الزبار والجفت ومعالجته. احنا في وزارة الصناعة والتجارة من خلال اللجنة العليا لتطوير التفتيش على الأعمال عالجنا هذا الموضوع بشكل جزئي، وحاليا تشكلت لجنة من رئاسة الوزراء على مستوى هاي ليفل من أصحاب القرار حتى يشوفوا علاج مستدام ودائم لمشكلة الزبار والجفت في معاصر الزيتون، يعني يكون في حلول مستدامة وتحقق الجرين جروث وتحافظ على البيئة، وبالتالي كمان بتلبي احتياج المعاصر اللي الآن أصبحت تصنيفها صناعي. فحبيت أوضح هاي النقاط.
يعطيك العافية ما قصرت. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. As we have just finished, I hope everyone enjoyed the coffee break. Dr. Vikas Kumar, so I'll just give a briefing of his bio. So Prof. Vikas Kumar is a Director of Research and Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Management at Bristol Business School, University of the West of England in the UK. He has over a decade of teaching and research experience and is Fellow of the HEA. He was a lecturer in the management at Dublin City University Business School from 2009 to 2013. He is the acting director of research. He serves on the editorial board of around 10 international journals and has guest edited several special issues in high-impact journals. Prof. Kumar works very closely with industries and has generated research funding and in excess of £1 million from various research agencies such as Innovate UK, EPSRC, British Council, British Academy, Newton Fund, and Science Foundation of Ireland. And he is with us in this project. Last but not least, his area of expertise: sustainable supply chain management, food supply chains, Industry 4.0, digital supply chain management, structure equation modeling, service operations management, short food supply chains, operational excellence, and circular economy. Please welcome Dr. Vikas Kumar.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. And I would like to thank everyone, Royal Scientific Society, all the funders who have funded this project, and all the audience sitting here for this 2 days workshop. I would like to re-emphasize what Moed was saying in the morning. It's a 2 days workshop, so we're trying to kind of take you through different aspects. The first part of my journey of today's presentation will very much focus around the circular economy principles in food industries. Anna, I think, already gave a really nice presentation talking more about the fundamental concept around circular economy. And my plan is to take you there, but before, why do we really need circular economy? So I think that's where probably I'm going to start my presentation today. And I will end up again with some more examples. It's good to see, like you already seen some of the evidence of the fantastic work of some industries in the UK and elsewhere around circular economy. I'm going to pick up around another 4 to 5 small companies in the UK who have kind of come up with new innovation, very much following these circular economy principles. And tomorrow, I think I'm going to touch upon a little bit more integrating how technology could be used to aid the circular economy principles. So if you want to hear more about the technology, please do come here again tomorrow. Okay. I think before I move on to talk, I would just talk a little bit about my university, from where I come from. So as you would know, I work for the Bristol Business School, University of West of England. The university is quite fairly, I would say, new university because it was formerly a polytechnic, and only in 1992 they got the university status. So it's primarily teaching intensive, but we have been doing quite well on the research front, and I think in leading in many areas. I think that's pretty evident based on the ranking. Just wanted to quickly share about that. But most importantly, I think it's based in Bristol. This is a fantastic place to live, and I think it's been consistently rated as the best place to live in the UK for a few years. Right, so what do you see here on the slide? You know, and I think this is a very, I would say, common picture. I would say we find in many developing countries, you know, who grow lots of grains, and often, and I think it just gets wasted. And you would be surprised. Any guesses, like how much of the food waste do we do? Any rough idea how much we waste? Any percentage, any figures? Sorry? In terms of percentage? 50%, all right? 1/3, okay. I think you're very close. I think that's right. We're actually close to 1/3. I think we really waste. And you know, amount of food that get wasted. Imagine, I think we always talk about, you know, people in not getting enough food in many nations, right? Malnutrition is a big challenge, and people dying from hunger. And I think if we simply follow on some of the best practices, I think if we don't waste this amount of food, imagine that can certainly feed the rest of the world. So I think the problem is, like, you know, how efficiently actually we're making best use of the resources we have. And the fundamental essence, I would say, about the circular economy when we talk about, you know, is about preservation of resources. You know, certain resources is really finite. You know, we know once it's gone, it's gone. So how do we really capture the value out of it? And I think Anna certainly gave a very good presentation talking about, like, you know, we do not capture those values. You know, 80% of the value is uncaptured. And this is where I think the whole essence of thinking around circular economy has emerged. Like, how do we really capture value out of this? And so the question that you asked at the end about, like, you know, why do we do that? You know, and, you know, what is the real motivation? Is it compliance? You know, it's also about extracting those resources. And many companies now do see that as a, you know, as an opportunity to really see how we can create more value out of things that we're actually wasting. You know, there's new business models are emerging, how we can actually think about new way of selling different things, and there's a consumer demand. There's always a pressure from the consumer as well. Like, you know, we're living in a generation where the new generation is really much more aware, and they try to follow and you know, the sustainable practices. They want to engage in businesses who are much more sustainable in that way. So it's actually a collective pressure, I think, which, you know, certainly makes this possible. And hopefully, I think, you know, we're moving in the right direction. I just wanted to, again, share a little bit, like I said, like, to put the context, like, why do we really need circular economy? So it's starting with the waste. And I think and what you see here on the slide, I think, just gives you a breakdown. Actually, where do you really waste food? Often, we know the first picture might give an impression maybe at the source where the food is being produced, or perhaps, you know, somewhere it is stored, and mainly is the industry responsible. And you will be very surprised, it's actually not the industries, not the others. We as an individual are the major contributor of this waste. The amount of waste that we generate from you know, the household is massive. I think if you look at about 44%. And, you know, that is also mostly about true, I would say, in the most developed world, for example, in the UK. You know, and I think you know, most of the food, even when we buy, it would see, like, you know, even we throw out, you know, even not even in fact using it. At the bottom you see here, it just talks about, like, how much amount of food, even without opening the packet, we simply dump. And there are numerous reasons. I think, you know, we touched upon some of the earlier discussions around, like, you know, innovative practices, like, you know, when you know the food is really bad and cannot be consumed. There's also, I think, the issue about the level of awareness, because, you know, when we talk about, you know, in packaging, you know, for example, in the UK, everything you buy, food products, you will have two things written. Are they either used by this date or best before this date? And consumers don't understand the difference. You know, most of the time when you say used by, certain, very likely the food quality is not going to be healthy after that date. And that's normally, you will find that in the meat label, for example. But there's, you know, if you talk about any normal vegetable, if you're buying a corn, if you're buying any beans, it has got best before date. Many people simply dump it because it's lying in the fridge. It looks perfectly fine, but they say, oh, the expiring date is there. You know, so it doesn't mean, you know, so it cannot be consumed. And that way we are throwing out the, you know, food waste. And you know, I mean, it's quite surprising, for example, in the UK context, you know, you would say, yes, it's a developed country, but do we grow enough food to feed our own people? The answer is no. We rely heavily on importing food from various countries, and mostly from Europe. Majority is come from Asia and also Africa. And this is the reason, I think, you know, during the pandemic, I think we were the more vulnerable than many other countries. Like Moed was saying in the morning, like, you know, Jordan was fine because we do things, lots of things, you know, we grow ourselves. So we didn't struggle with the supply chain. In the UK, we struggle because even to feed our own people, we have to buy food, mostly fresh vegetables and fruits coming from Netherlands, Spain, all the countries had their own borders locked down. UK had their own borders locked down, and everything crippled. We don't have like really well-established internal system, so people are not really connected with the local food. But yes, of course, the pandemic did change a lot of it. I think there was a lot of reconnection between the farmers and the consumers. And I think that trend hopefully continues, and hopefully at least we realize that what sort of situation we will be in if we overly rely on other things. But here I think just to give you kind of a bit of an overview, there's a huge amount of food waste that goes around. Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that makes it easier. Okay. Right, so I think while I was talking about the other context, I also thought like it's best to give you a little bit about the Jordan, and I was trying to find a bit more information. And I found that, a report published back in 2016, it mentioned that around 50 to 65% of the food is wasted here. So it's a common problem here as well. But I would say it's not just here or in the UK, it's throughout the world. And that's the reason why we have a significant amount of waste, just going in the landfill. But of course, there's lots of initiatives being taken, and I think this is another evidence down here, a report published back in 2017, that how workers were really trained in order to ensure that we do not waste food in different stages. So, the idea here was very much about it's a fundamental problem which is actually affecting all of us, regardless which country we are based in. And I think this is a problem, I think that we need to think very carefully. Yeah, I think it's a bit slow in transition. And again, here in this slide, I just wanted to give you a bit more overview in terms of where the waste is coming from. And I think at different stages, we talk about in the supply chain, right at the farm and during the manufacturing, during the distribution, during the hospitality, in the industry level, and the consumption level. And that again shows you different aspects and how different stakeholders can really work together. Because one of the questions was about how do we really make it possible? And as I said, you can always blame sometimes policies, that maybe government is not making enough policies. Sometimes we blame industries who are involved in the supply chain. And many times we say maybe some other actors, other stakeholders. But effectively, I think if you really want to make this transition towards circular economy, each and every stakeholder has a very important role to play. So even as an individual, I think we will have to commit ourselves. Every time, even we talk about recycling, which is probably an older concept than we're talking about a step beyond that. How many times we really recycle everything that we throw out properly? We end up dumping everything in one bin. It never gets to the destination where it is. And it's a challenge, I think I would say in the UK, for example, where there's distinct kind of a separation between the recycling. So you throw food into the food waste, any rubbish somewhere else, plastics, papers, in other recycling pot. But I was doing kind of research, talking to a number of people, and I'm very surprised that even if we separate waste down there, but how much of that waste is effectively being recycled, for example, the figure is less than 20%. Either majority of them are just burnt, or goes into landfill, or probably is shipped across in the other developing countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on. So actually, we are not resolving the problem. We are just shifting the problem from one place to the other. And we are saying, yes, the UK, let's say, is a really very much committed towards sustainability, about green practices. We're trying to reduce the carbon emission. But I think the actual figure is not right because of the different ways how this is being reported down there. But I said, it's not all the hope is not lost. I think there are certainly some good practices that are happening across the world. And I think this is something practiced by leading, I would say, retailers. And many of the retailers you will recognize, because I could certainly see IKEA, for example, is operating in Jordan. Carrefour is there as well. And these leading retailers have now come together to kind of commit how they can really reduce waste. So it's a consortium, we call it 10 into 20 into 30 consortium, where they're working, each retailers are working with 20 plus suppliers to ensure that they can massively reduce the amount of waste by 2030. And I think that sort of commitment certainly we need. But again, here you would say, we're talking about the large organization, and with countries like in Jordan, even in the UK, we have got 90% SMEs. So where are SMEs in this picture? You can always say, okay, large organizations have got adequate financial backup, they've got all the resources, systems are in place, and they can invest in research to think about the creative ideas. And that was one of the questions that you asked earlier, how do we really bring SMEs on board? But again, this is, I think, the two aspects I would add what Anna said earlier. One is about raising the awareness, because many times companies are not on board simply because they do not understand what it is and what actually the value it can add. So we don't think in that way. Compliance, of course, does make a big difference. But also, I think I would say the adequate support from the government can actually make a huge difference. So for example, in the UK, the government did realize, like despite pushing all the circular economy, sustainability reporting, of course, the large organizations were able to report how well they do. That's a separate kind of a discussion. But also they realized that the SMEs are not really participating in those activities. So now they started kind of supporting SMEs with some financially, but they're also actually asking SMEs to access those funds, but together in support of the universities. Because then you can have that knowledge transfer where actually they expect the universities to train them, educate them. We need to, of course, make some massive changes. And I think one of the objectives of our project is to kind of integrate that recap into our curriculum. In the UK, that's what we have started doing across all the universities. So now we are mapping everything that we teach against the UN Sustainable Development Goals. How do we really address those things? How do we really make the next generation aware of these challenges that we are facing? Because if the next generation is not really aware of those challenges, then certainly we are going to struggle to actually make a real difference. So we know the solution, but we do not know how do we really approach that solution. I just thought like to touch up a little bit some basic aspect as well. I think we talk about we're talking about the kind of addressing the environmental concerns. We're talking about the sustainability and circular economy. Just thought like let's touch upon like a little bit on the sustainable supply chain as well. And as you would see, like when we talk about any supply chains, I think of course the compliance, I think that comes first, because we talk about that supply chains need to really operate according to the rules and regulations. I'm not sure why it's not moving up. Yeah, sorry, yeah, it's going down, okay. And then also it has to actually operate much more on the the ethics side as well. And I think again, a lot of times I think we don't really think much about ethics. But again, you know that it's quite important that to operate any business with integrity. If we do not operate with integrity together with all the stakeholders that's involved in the supply chain, I think it's going to pose significant challenge. And I think this is becoming more challenging, I would say, because one of the reasons I mentioned earlier about the kind of increasing awareness from the consumers' end, because consumers are now much more kind of keen to know what companies are doing in this regard. And there's plenty of evidence where actually if something has come up, for example, a few years ago, one of the largest retailers, I think Primark, I think they were using child laborers back in Bangladesh to manufacture, and like even other major brands like Mango and others. And when that news came out in the Western media, I think their profit fell significantly. And I was talking to students at that point in time, and many of them were really, really embarrassed that why I'm buying products from this particular company if they are not really following health, health and safety issues, thinking not implementing and involving any child laborers into their business. And then these companies had to really work hard to then come up with to establish themselves in the market by showing that now they have taken the responsibility of those kids. Now they're ensuring that no child labor is really involved. So ethical integrity, it's also, I think, is quite important. And in order to be responsible, I think certainly you have to operate within both the legal and the ethical aspect. The reason I said it doesn't equate to sustainable, because sometimes you can behave more as a responsibility, but you may still not be really kind of working, much more broadly in terms of operating within the natural and the social thresholds. So unless you operate thinking about that impact, because very much I would say at the moment we are driven, very much in terms of again profitability, and we think about the profitability first before we think about then how do we really address now the environmental concern, or how do we really address the societal concerns. And that's what we call it more like an instrumental logic. And so you've got 4 questions here. So how can supply chain benefit from addressing environmental social issues? But these issues are only kind of thought about once you think about, whether my company or organization is really making a profit. So the essence is that's still, although you're still making some steps, but actually that is kind of secondary. And, in the common mindset is pretty, I would say, you can understand that why that's happening, because if there's a business that exists, they have to make profit. But I think it's thinking much more, I would say, broadly in terms of you can still make profit by still acting much more sustainably, and that's where you need to think about some creative and innovative ideas. So if the existing practices are not leading to the desired profit that you're expecting, then perhaps you need to think and do things in a very different way, which can help you to achieve your ambitions. And that's what we call it here, ecologically dominant logic, where I think the importance is given first on, I would say, thinking more about the environmental goals. And then, at the bottom of the core heart is actually more about the profitability. Yeah, I think this is causing a bit problem. I'm very slow. I'll just move on. Okay. Now, before I jump onto the circular economy, I just thought I think it's quite important to also look at the cost, because one thing that came up in terms of recovering value. But every time we do things, especially let's say in the food sector we are talking here, have we really thought about the true cost of anything that we buy? We're buying banana, for example, from the market, and in the UK, if you buy a single banana, it costs you about 50p. How much the producer or the grower actually effectively gets out of that 50p? And you will be very surprised, probably about 5 pence, maybe 7 pence. Majority of the profit is taken by the retailers or the distributors. So is that fair? Because the people who are really putting effort into that, they're not actually getting the fair share of what effort they're putting. So now if you're asking them to move away from the conventional way of growing things to follow more regenerative kind of farming practices, it does sometimes add cost. But if they're not compensated for that cost, then there's no incentive. Because other question probably was what is there? Can help them to really, adopt these sort of practices? And I think incentives does play a bigger role. And I think it does help not only the people who are involved, even for the industries. If the government says that yes, they're going to give them tax incentives or some other perks, then that will bring industries on board. So simply asking that you need to do this, but not providing any sort of incentives, it doesn't really work in all cases. So let me take you through some of the ideas in terms of what the true cost of food is. As you know that food is important. None of us can survive without food. But it also, I think, if you look at the negative consequences of growing food, I think it's leading to, for example, 80% of the deforestation. It's taking 70% of our freshwater use and also close to 30% of the greenhouse emissions. And there was a research done, I think, where it said every time every dollar that you spend on food, actually it has got a societal cost of at least $2. And I'll show you how that equates to $2 in a minute. Again, I think this slide gives you a little bit of a more further breakdown of those different costs and how it totally adds up. And you can see, overall, it's quite significant. I think this certainly based on the US item, so it's about $2,100 US billion. So it's quite huge, quite significant. And I think some of the examples which I will take you through, I think will actually help you to gauge the differences and where the cost estimations are coming from. Okay. Yeah, I think it's really slow. Yeah, I think I'll skip this slide just to give you, put this frame in the picture. Like I said, if you're talking about meat consumption, how much you pay, if you add all the social costs, environmental costs, it will be way more expensive. So we are not actually thinking from that perspective. And I think this is quite important to know because I think if we have this awareness, I think at all levels, outside, not just about the industries or the policymakers should know about this, it's actually us. If we are aware, then I think we can certainly drive that change. And I think consumers are certainly one of the very powerful forces, I would say, to make this change happen. And that's the reason I think we need to really educate our next generation to have that understanding. Why do we really need that sudden shift from the way that we are doing things? So why it is important to know the true cost, and as I was mentioning earlier, if you really know the true cost of the food, I think that will certainly make a huge difference because then we can have a better planning, we can think more creatively in terms of how we can reduce some of those implications, especially about the social implications, especially thinking about the environmental costs associated with the every food that we grow. And that will also change practices. So I think that will, you will see in a minute, in how that whole thing that I'm talking about will link back to the circular economy side. So let's look at some of the costing. For example, if we talk about the environmental cost, and I said, I started my presentation showing you the vast amount of food waste. And those research done back in 2012 by the World Resource Institute. And it was telling, like, if we put all the waste together, it's actually, you know, in terms of, you know, the comparing the other countries and amount of the carbon footprint, it will be third highest. So the food waste can actually compare against countries. And I think that shows the level of the challenge, you know, and the problem that we're talking about, and why it is really important to think about it. Some more examples, I would say, looking at the different specific food products. So for example, if we talk about potatoes, you know, growing 1 kilogram of potatoes, how much equivalent, you know, the carbon footprint is close to 0.3 kg. If we talk about chicken, is about 1.1 kilogram. If we talk about beef, you can see it's about 14.6 kilogram. So that's a huge kind of implication, I think, and this is the reason why we, you know, people, you know, are talking about moving more plant-based diet, and you know, and how we can maybe, you know, think about much more in a creative way, like in moving away, because the meat consumption is quite high all across the globe. And perhaps I think this is something will compel us to really think much more creatively. And this is again a further slide to give you a bit more understanding in terms of the, you know, feed versus food and how much it goes before we actually get a kilogram of you know, the calories from different food products. And I think that's sort of, I think, in a visual, I would say, you know, kind of a view of this, you know, feed versus, you know, food, again, can, you know, helps you to kind of rethink your way of looking at things in terms of what needs to be done in that regard. You know, where the consumption needs to be reduced, where I think perhaps we can, you know, maybe look for some different alternatives, which can probably maybe substitutes, which can help us to tackle some of the fundamental challenges that we are facing. Yeah. Some more evidence, again, if we're talking about normal butter and how much carbon footprint is actually leading to, again, you can see, like, just to get that butter, you have about 23.8 kilograms of the carbon footprint, as opposed to something which is coming from the plant-based. And I think this is, again, links back to your circular economy principle, because when we talk about, like, you know, and I was referring about redesigning, rethinking, like, you know, how do we really redesign, think, and come with new designs? And I think in circular economy principle also talks about, you know, how we can really think about different ways of doing things. So can we replace something, you know, with some different alternatives which can help us to reduce our environmental impact? And if that's the case, then we should be probably following that. We all hear about the climate change. I think that's on the news almost every day, in terms of how much damage that we are, you know, committing to the environment. And this slide just gives you a bit of I would say, an overview in terms of how much we are affecting and growing, you know, having an impact on the glaciers. This was a picture taken back in 1917. As you would imagine, you know, this is how it should look like. We're very close to the North Pole. Then we have got a picture from 2005. You can see the drastic changes, and I was trying to find from 2020, and this is somebody posted on Facebook recently, and you can imagine the significant change. And the reason you can see, like, why the temperature is soaring up all across the globe, I think we're seeing shift in the climate pattern. So this is just to give you, like, amount of the impact the carbon footprint is having on our planet. So again, another reason, like, you know, why we really need to think very seriously about that. If we talk about the social cost, so that was more about the environmental cost. I'm not sure whether it's a famous saying here in Jordan, but in India, we all talk about, like, you know, eat apple day and you will keep the doctor away. So that was a common perception. And that's true because of the nutrients down there. But I think, you know, because the way, you know, we have now commercialized, you know, we have been selling, you know, food products grown from one region to all across the globe, we have followed different, I would say, the farming practices. We are heavily using pesticides. We're heavily using fertilizers, all the chemical ones. And what is happening? Because it's certainly polluting the land, the soil, it's polluting the groundwater. So if you think in that way, so every 1 kilogram of apple, it has got a kind of a negative impact, is about 21 cents. And that is resulting in, you know, even people who are working in those industries, the farmers who are growing that, because, you know, they are actually, you know, directly consuming all those chemicals, you know, that is leading to people off sick. It's reducing the life expectancy as well. So it's huge. So the saying which I was always reflecting back in India from childhood, my parents would say, like, eat apple day, eat the doctor away. Although, by the way, my parents are doctors, so I can't be away from the doctors. But yes, I mean, that has changed. Now it is thinking, kind of giving us another opportunity to rethink of those common perceptions and how far we have moved away from that. But of course, there are alternatives if we follow more regenerative practices. Why there is a sudden shift in the organic food products. Recently, and especially during the pandemic, I mean, one of the things we were trying to learn around the food sector, what has happened during the pandemic, and there has been a sudden rise in the amount of organic food consumption. Because suddenly people became very aware, like, we need to really eat much more healthy, nutritious diet. Hopefully that will keep the virus away. At least, we make you healthier. So that's, the huge challenge down there. If we talk about, for example, like, again, in developed world, often we think and, that they might be doing things in a better way, but that's not always right. Again, a quick question, like, anybody knows, and any guesses, like, how many percentage of people who are overweight in Europe? Any guesses? A, B, C, D? C? How many of you see? Can you just raise your hand? Anybody saying A? B? Okay, and D? I think you're right. You will be very surprised, So again, that shows about, like, again, the practices, and I think, of course, the consumption of the junk food, which is very common in Europe. And in fact, I think we are struggling with that. And I think obesity is one of the major challenges. Not just, of course, now UK is not part of the Europe in that sense of the Brexit, but yes, in the UK, it's a major challenge. And I think the healthcare services are under huge pressure. Of course, there are some policies has been brought into practice in terms of reducing the sugar and the salt in the product that you sell, clear labeling, but I don't think it has gone to an extent where we can really see some changes in that regard. And as we're talking about, like, and this is the reason why I was talking about obesity, is also about the social cost linked to food. And I think if you do not consume and things in the right way, if we talk about, I think, some of the key players, how much percentage they take, and I was referring the example of the banana. Again, here in the cocoa supply chain, we could see growers and workers, in fact, just getting 5%. Retailers, about 35%, and the same goes for the other manufacturers, I think, going 40%. So, and that's a huge, I think, and that almost applies for every food product, that probably we would see or we consume every day. And I think that is something, is always, we talk about always economic aspect. We have been talking about the environmental impact for very long, at least 20, 30, 40 years, I would say. But it's a social implication, or the social costing is the only probably I've heard at least appearing in, let's say, in academia and research side only in the last 10 years. And still there's a lot to do on the social side of it. And I think I will show you in a minute. I said, breakdown in terms of the social cost, and it is quite significant. I think just an added layer, bit further information, looking at some specific suppliers in the cocoa supply chain. And it's also, I think, sometimes, there are some key players which are dominant players. So I think that they take the majority. And of course, some of the brands you will recognize, at least Nestle. I can see the bottles from Nestle, so you will certainly recognize that. So if some brands have certainly got the major stake into that. So Mars, Ferrero, and all these 5 companies actually have all control about 50% of the market. So because they control, now here there's I would say there is an opportunity, because if you control majority of the market, if all these manufacturers or retailers or distributors, whoever they are, if they are really committed about making a difference, they can really make a difference. So I think, a lot of time it's more about advertising and branding that we do this. And I think Nestle has been caught several times into making those kind of false claims, because at one hand they're saying we're reducing this, but then on the other hand, for example, in Indonesia, in the palm oil, I think they're doing massive farming. So that is actually leading to deforestation, I think, and affecting the whole biodiversity in that sense. So it's all about, I think, having that clear commitment. And again, if the consumers are not really aware of those malpractices, then I think it's not going to change. Because if the consumers start boycotting their products, then that will certainly compel them to really rethink about their strategies going forward. And hopefully that can bring about some massive changes in this area. Right, so again, I think this is just to show you how different producers, I think, and different some sort of costs associated with the different food products. So what you see here on the cocoa in Ivory Coast, most of the things that you see in the red is actually social cost. So anything that you know, in terms of the actual costing that we're talking about, which I will show you in the next slide, is actually made of a majority of about more than 80% cost is actually social cost. Whereas if you talk about the example of coffee in Vietnam, there I think the majority of cost is actually environmental cost down there because they're heavily using pesticides, use of the water and the resources. It's quite low in cocoa because there's not much use of the fresh water and other things. But certainly you can see there's a huge cost linked to the societal cost. If you talk about the tea in Kenya, it's kind of fairly kind of balanced in terms of both environmental as well as the social cost. And these are the costs is normally hidden from all of us because we don't never think about it in that way, like how it is really affecting our society in that sense. So if you see the breakdown of the cocoa here, like actually what you pay is one pound, 1.35 in euros. Whereas actual cost, if you add the societal cost and environmental cost, is actually almost 6 times. So you can imagine what's the significant cost down there. And I think this is again just to raise that level of awareness. It's not about you start charging that one because what is about addressing those fundamental underlying issues that is actually compelling or leading to that higher cost. So if you're actually not paying, for example, the fair share to the market, to the actual growers, there's income disparity down there. There are other challenges, there. If you're still following some heavily, pesticides and chemicals in the production, then actually is adding to that cost. And that is more something that we really need to think about it. Because we don't talk about that societal cost, to be honest. We still talk about it on the environmental side, but this is something in an argument. It has only kind of started gaining momentum in recent years. But I'm very sure that this kind of argument will become much more stronger as we move ahead in this world. I will quickly maybe skip this one because I want to show you, but I'm conscious about the time, and maybe I can show you perhaps tomorrow. When we'll have more time. And yeah, so this is another slide, again, just shows you a bit of a global carbon footprint of the different countries. Of course, you can see Qatar quite higher. The only reason why higher in there because it's related to the population size. Because you would imagine why, for example, a country from where I come from, India, should be higher. But because the population is huge, if you break it down per person, it will be quite low. And where here population is quite low, but related to the carbon footprint that they're generating is quite high. Interestingly, UK, like I said, if we all live very much like people in the UK live, then certainly we would need 3 Earths, to really, have, and I think, so, that again just shows the severity of the problem, and I think that's something we really need to think very carefully because, at the moment, everything that we are doing actually is quite unsustainable. And if we continue to behave, act in the same way, it won't be very far that, it will be really difficult to really survive. And I think, we've been hearing all this from different channels. And I think that will become a reality for sure. And this is the reason why the climate activists are really talking about it, that, all the actions across the globe, even we are saying we are committing to that, we are not sticking, And I think we talked about the Paris Agreement, and we talked about US, for example, pulling out of it. Hopefully they have recently joined, which is good news. But again, is that enough? I think sometimes we see that as much more as a whitewashing, that yes, we are showing our commitment. On the backside, we are still not following those practices because we are still very much driven from our economic means. So, just quickly to wrap up, as I said, we are very much, when we talk about in the food system, very much unsustainable. And I think this is a bigger challenge, and I think we really need to think about it. And this is where now we need to think, in terms of circular economy practices. Because, Anna certainly showed the 2 sides of the butterfly diagram, one was more the technical side, one on the bio side. And I think, that way, I think, we can certainly not only reduce the environmental impact, but also I think creating that, the value out of the waste. And that probably, I would say, is a buy-in for the industry because every time we do not think about the waste and how much value we can generate. Of course, there are challenges, and like I've said, probably some of you would probably come back to me after the end of the presentation in terms of how we can really address, and that's where we need innovation. I think if I tell you a little bit about from the UK perspective, I think UK government is putting lots of money and research to think about how we can come up with new circular economy business models, or to think in a creative way. So the evidence and example that Anna shared at the end, and I will show you a little bit more. I was just wondering, maybe there's overlap. Luckily isn't. So Phyllis' example, for example, I do use a lot in our teaching, but again, I thought, well, that's one of the large organizations. So they can do things what they want to do. What we need to think much more from the small organizations who often struggle to kind of meet those obligations. So we are here, so I'm not going to spend time talking about it, but yes, very much still we are in the take, make, use and dispose kind of, mindset. We have started talking about it. We're having that discussion. We are moving. We are making certainly some steps in that direction. But to really make a big difference everywhere, I think we certainly need to be much more bolder, and I think we need to be much more, we need to come forward to really adopt these practices to ensure we transition towards the circular economy practices. I don't think I really need to spend time explaining the differences, but yeah, we talked about it early in the morning. Anna gave certainly a good overview, so hopefully you understand. The key idea here, I think, if we talk about circular economy, I said, not to reduce, just to eliminate the waste, how we can. So if it's something we can recover, recycle, keep doing that. But if we can't do that, then think about a creative way of using that waste. And some of the example that I will show you is more about that phase, where actually you can't think of anything else. What can I do? Because what I can reuse, I have reused. What I can recycle, I can recycle. But if something that doesn't fit in either of those categories, then we have to think much more creatively in converting those waste into a different form, which can still have some more value. And I said, earlier, just this slide just kind of reiterates my other point about the food waste, and especially in the food system. When we talk about, we are still very much operating in a linear way. And I think the picture just taken from the Ellen MacArthur report, and it certainly shows that how we are consuming all these different resources without really thinking about that. Many of the resources are going to have us either finite or they're going to have a huge impact. Like, for example, fresh water. We do have huge amount of water on this planet, but if you talk about the fresh water, it's very little. But we are not even very careful in how do we really use that fresh water properly. So that brings to the circular economy framework. I think, and we talked a lot about the reuse and reduce and recycle. I think we I don't think we touch upon quite a lot in terms of recovery. So it's based on the 4 R's that we talk about. So how do we reuse things once we have used it? How we can reduce it, I think that's also quite important, because again, if the resources are finite, we need to think very, very creatively and very carefully. In the food context, again, I said something, we can reuse it, fantastic. If something, amount of food waste, certainly we can reduce, because that something is under control. If we're just behaving much more, I would say, responsibly, we can certainly make a big difference. And I said that difference could be made at the individual level rather than blaming any parties, industries, government, anyone. I think it's our responsibility. If we can change our behavior, I think that will reflect in practices. Something that cannot be done, then think about the creative ways. If lots of food waste, if it ends up in food waste, can we maybe use animal feed, for example? Can we create maybe use the bioenergy from that? So there are a number of different ways how this could be used. And there are a number of ways how we can really kind of reduce the environmental impact on our planet. So if we can do that, then certainly I think we can certainly make a big difference in terms of reducing the carbon footprint, and also I think behaving much more sustainably and much more ethically and legally and responsibly, and that we were referring to earlier. Simply again, it's a reiteration of the earlier point about the circular economy practices. I think prevention is the first. If not, I think about redistribution. Think about the new product. I think the fantastic example of the biodegradable kind of packaging. I think the product was quite heavily covered in the Western media a few years ago, and it came out of, in fact, from one of the student projects. So again, you can see how universities and institutions can actually play a huge role in bringing those innovations into practice. And I think the product that you probably saw, it was more about coming from the plants base, but there's also, I think, research going around, the fish waste. So lots of, fish waste that goes out, which is simply thrown or goes in landfill. They're now converting that into a biofilm. And again, I think, biodegradable, which can be used very much like a plastics, but it can be consumed. If it can consume, or at least it will biodegrade, so it won't have any impact. So that's sort of, again, innovative ideas and innovation. Of course, to make that happen, I think that's where I think the different parties need to come together. So it's not that sole responsibility, I would say, only for the industries. Industries need to work together with the technical institutions. and that has to be supported by the government, and there has to be input from all the different key stakeholders. And I think if that sort of a coordination, I think, is there, then very likely we can always come up with new sort of innovative products in the market, which will not only address the fundamental problem that we are facing, at the same time, it can also generate lots of economic value, which is, is important for industries to really survive. This slide just to kind of give you, because we talked a lot about the terms, like when we talk about conventional farming, when I was talking about the apple, for example, and then what is the regenerative farming practices. I'm not going to go through the list. Certainly, I will make sure the slides are available after my talks. Anybody would really like to revisit, you can. But just to show the difference, like how different practices can have a different and drastic impact. And some of the good practices can have a good impact on our climate. So why we should be following the other one rather than not the other one? Because, because we are heavily involved, I think probably very much in the conventional farming, because we just think about boosting the productivity without actually thinking much about the planet and how much impact it's causing. Because that's, I would always say, it's just a very short-sighted kind of view of looking at things. Because that is certainly not going to be sustaining for very long. And there will be time that you can't do much about it. But if you think much more in the long term, how following some of the best practices can actually improve not just about the productivity, it can actually improve the biodiversity, and that will improve the overall the quality of life that we all are aspiring for. This slide just gives you again a bit of an idea. Like I said, it's not a task of one individual or one company. It's about all the stakeholders that we can think about in a food supply chain. Whether we're talking about the food producers, we're talking people who do food branding, retailers, whether it's about waste management companies, city governments, institutions, and so on. And every stakeholder can actually make a big difference. And that was the point I was trying to make here. It's something that you can keep on shifting that blame from one party to the other. That's what we normally do. If something fails, we say, oh, government doesn't support us. If the government support that, they say industry is not making right steps. If the industry is making right steps, then you blame something else. But actually, it's a collective effort from everyone, I think, in that supply chain to make this happen. And I think in that, I would say, if you really want to kind of have this circular economy implementation, not just in the food sector, in any other sector, all these parties need to come together and play their role. And as far as they play their role, I think certainly they can make this transition possible fairly quickly. I'm just approaching towards the last leg of my presentation. I think this kind of touches upon what Anna was mentioning earlier. Rather than thinking about managing waste afterwards, why don't we think about designing in the first instance? Because if we design keeping waste in mind, and this is what I think earlier comment was about the life cycle assessment. Thinking about what is the impact at the different stages of the product life cycle can again help us to really plan in a better way. In the food sense, for example, like I said, it's proven that if you use a diverse set of crops, for example, that can certainly improve the biodiversity and productivity as well at the same time. We always talk about lowering the impacts. Certain foods, so for example, most of the sugar would come from the sugar cane or beetroot. Can be replaced with that some other alternatives which has got a less environmental impact, and there's a fantastic example and evidence of the different replacement product that could be used, and that can certainly bring down the impact. Same goes for the upcycling as well, or if it follow much more in terms of regenerative practices, that can again reduce the carbon footprint. So it's all about, I think, looking for solutions around us. It's not that we need to really dig deeper to find the solution. The solution is in front of us. What is important is to really understand the implication of that solutions, and also trying to make sure that we buy those ideas and we try together to make those big difference. And if we focus on all those sides, I think certainly we can address all these challenges. And this slide just gives you a bit of an idea in terms of how circular design for food offers greater benefits than just sourcing alone. And you can see in every sense, the circularity is certainly going to be much more beneficial in every sense. So that again is to give you in terms of when you think about implementation. I think Fawad was telling in the morning very nicely in terms of upfront his thinking was that maybe that's not going to help, but implementing then you can start realizing the actual benefit it can actually provide you. Now having that awareness of the different organizations around the world, how they have successfully managed to implement and at the same time being profitable, they're still growing. That is a fantastic kind of, I would say, inspiration for other industries to really embark on that circular economy journey. Now, these are some of the examples, I think different than what we discussed. Yes, so I think there's a couple of examples here, I think, about the small companies and who have really shown some of the fantastic evidence of how we can come up with new innovative solutions. So the first one is Pinatex, again, a London-based company. Not sure what you call pineapple here in your language here in Jordan? It's same, right? So in India, we also call ananas. So it's a very common. And so what they're doing, and again, like if you talk about that particular fruit, we throw most of the part, right? We throw leaves and even the outside pulp and everything. What they've done is that they've used all those, pineapple leaf, fiber, and everything left during into converting some sort of a leather kind of a fabric. So that's, again, a fantastic, thinking, I would say, in terms of making best use of that waste, because otherwise it would simply end up in landfill, right? Or compost. But here I think, what they're doing at the moment is at the moment they certainly make it very clear, like they're coating it with some non-biodegradable materials, but they're working on to kind of, replace that with some sort of biodegradable alternative. So that is, again, one simple example, like in how small things can actually make a big difference, and it can open up new opportunities. So as a food company, if you're just thinking about the pineapple, maybe you're selling different products, maybe slices, maybe juice, or whatever, you can actually use that waste to now come up with something different, which can again open up new business opportunities for you. Similarly goes for the, like I said, like sugar beet. Again, there's a huge amount of pulp which actually goes on waste. This company, Cellucomp, I think what they've done is actually they have converted this waste into a material called, they've copyrighted as a Quran. It's again as a cellulose fibers. I think that has got all sort of different kind of uses, particularly used in paints, cosmetics, and even the fishing rods. You've got other two companies. One about the plastic bottles, again, is a very common problem, again, especially in the food sector, packaging. We actually waste huge amount of plastics. And this company is actually using those plastic waste to making it in a fabrics. So they're using those plastic waste into fabrics, which again could be recirculated. So it's going back to the circular economy principle. So we're making different use of that. There's another one company which is also called Recycling Technologies. So what they have done actually, we throw again lots of plastic waste coming from the food packaging and all. Into smaller kind of molecules. So they've developed a new method and how to break it down into different molecules, and then using those molecules into different kind of applications, for example, in industrial oils and waxes. So again, these are some of the evidence and examples which again show that if you think a bit more creatively, there's always a way out. And also, I think in terms of long-term sustainability of the firm, especially when you're facing massive competition from your different competitors, sometimes diversifying and looking for the alternative business models, which is actually emerging as a byproduct from your existing business, can actually help you to gain some good kind of market share in a different direction. So I'll just end up my presentation. I think this is something I was trying to re-emphasize here. We can talk about all those different practices. We now understand what those certain principles are. The important thing here is about raising that level of awareness, and awareness among the industries of all shapes and sizes, awareness among the I would say, the consumers. Governments around the world certainly are aware, and they're making different policies and practices. It was quite good to hear this morning in terms of ministry how they're actually really pushing the green agenda and the sustainable agenda, which actually really should be really welcome, because that is something will put Jordan in the forefront, especially in the Middle Eastern region, in terms of some of those best practices. But it's quite important that industries cannot work alone to handle and address every problem, and that's why they really need to work together with the universities and the institutions, where they can have this knowledge transfer. They can think together, and because sometimes you need a different perspective, because often, we talk about academics, they'll say they're always in the theories. That's right, they do think about the theories, but then some of the creative ideas sometimes emerges from those theories. So it's about actually marrying those practices into the theories, which can actually lead to those innovative solutions. And of course, then government needs to support those sort of cross-collaborative, interactions to happen. And the reason why I'm here with Moed is part of that sort of initiative with different countries, UK and Jordan has taken to bring us together to think much more creatively how we can really ensure that we can help industries to transition towards these circular economy practices and to raise that level of awareness and be there whenever they need that, whether it's a technical or consulting advice from us. So we'll end up here. So thank you very much, and we'll be very happy to take any questions from.
Thank you, Vikas, for the amazing lecture. So just to recap, so we spoke about food waste as a nation's responsibility. So we have a culture issue, lack of incentives and its importance for industry playmakers and for all of us. If we don't play with taxation so that we support them in the change and transition, nothing can work. Incorporating environmental cost, health services impact cost and treatment cost, all that adds to the value. Educating the consumers, carbon footprint and food contributes to most CO2 emissions. Recovery value of products and materials is very important and multidisciplinary. So any questions, please pass it on. Yeah, I forgot to mention that we shifted the RECP expert lectures by Jihan and Hussam Al-Kilani tomorrow morning, inshallah, so that we can give you a break and we can have lunch. Yeah.
Thank you, Vikas, for the amazing insights on circular economy. Now, to me, circular economy makes a lot of sense. But the question is, why it's not yet implemented very well across the world? What are the constraints for implementing such?
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's really a good question, because I think I said if we know what it is, why companies are, or like why we are not really implementing that. I think there are two reasons. I think we are talking about the circular economy at a very high level so far. So I think there's a still degree of level of awareness that's not there. And we did a piece of research just before the pandemic. Because I said, one of my research interests around food sector. So we did a good survey of about maybe 300 companies in the UK, just to really understand, whether they are following any circular economy practices. And we were very shocked and surprised, because in the UK, circular economy is everywhere. You talk about the media, you talk about the different platforms being talked about, and about only 40%, were kind of either in the process of implementing or thinking about it. There are about more than 20% who had no clue what it is. They've heard the term, but they don't know about it. And some were, of course, talking more about in terms of their own challenges. And I think one challenge was about we do not have resources, because the reason, why I think, those responses were because they're coming from the SMEs. Because SMEs often run by very small, depends on the shapes and sizes. In the UK, the definition is about any company which has got up to 250 people, but many companies actually have less than 10 people who are operating, and they don't see any kind of reason why we should be. First, because they say there is no incentive in doing that, for example, so there is no government support. Even if we are keen, we do not access those grants, and we can't. And then also, I think in terms of level of awareness in that sense. So many of them had no clue what it is about. So the reason why we haven't been very successful is also because we haven't been very successful in terms of making industries really aware of the potential that circular economy can bring to their business. Because often we see as a level of a bureaucracy as something, it's a buzzword, we're talking about it. But I think, convincing, the industries and actually bring, that's why I think it's about sharing best practices and evidence of, implementing those practices and how that practices has made a real difference in terms of, of course, businesses are really interested in profitability. So if you can show that, yes, implementing circular economy practices, doesn't actually add more costs, but in fact it can actually really boost their profitability, then yes, they can come on board. And I said for SMEs, there is certainly need, I think I would say, in terms of the government to provide that level of support. The UK, started on the circular economy probably maybe about 7 years ago. And I think this is what they did. I think they started this mapping exercise in terms of, and they realized that yes, it is not possible until we support them. So now they're actually pouring lots of funding. But again, that I was mentioning earlier, they're trying to bring industries and the in the universities together. So in order to access that fund, there's a compulsion that you have to collaborate, but it has to be led by businesses. So universities just simply can't ask more money for research, for example, like you would say for theory-based research. So it has to be led by businesses, but they have to collaborate with the universities in order to access those funds. And the idea is not to unnecessarily push them together, but because they realize that that's how you can actually make them aware, you can educate them, you can realize them the potential benefits, and you can get all the right advice and support you need to make that successful transition. So there's a bit of a work, I would say, needs to be done in terms of, again, still raising that level of awareness. But I always say, like, who are the people who work in industries, for example, right? Our next generation. And I think if we are not educating our own workforce down here, then that's not going to, we are not going to achieve that ambition. So it's quite important that actually we embed all these practices and the theories we talk about, circular economy, we talk about sustainability, into our curriculum to make sure that the next generation workforce is ready and able to really meet the expectation of the industry, and also to meet the wider kind of ambitions about addressing some of the challenges that we're facing for the environment. Yes, sorry.
Thank you very much. He answered the question. I want to talk about the society, not only the producers or the industry, also the consumer behavior may lead some of the products. This is my question, and you answered some of it.
Right. Well, I will just add to that last bit you said about the consumer behavior, and I think and I think this is real evidence from the recent pandemic. Like I said, like at the moment we will always go for cheaper food. Why do we go to supermarkets, for example, right? Because we can get it cheaper rather than going and buying directly from the local farmers. Often because you will have to pay slightly more. But during this pandemic, when there was a lot about the virus, nobody know how it's going to affect. People suddenly started following much more healthy practices. There's a survey done in France, and I said suddenly the consumption of the organic food went quite up significantly. The reason why it was not very high before to that, because it's costly, because if you're following organic practices, it comes at the cost, and people were not willing to spend that money. But if consumers' behavior is shifting towards much more, I would say, healthier food as opposed to the cheaper food, that is also going to give a boost to the farmers who are actually engaged in the conventional practices, think much more organically. Because if there's a market, a lot of times I do a lot of work with the farmers, because short food supply chain is one of the areas that I work heavily with, and I had projects with Brazil and Vietnam in past. And I've spoken to many farmers and producers. Some of them do follow, and some of them don't. The reason who don't is simply because they say either there's no market, at least locally. So they might see a market in the UK, for example, not there. So, for example, right now in Sri Lanka, as you would know, they're in economic kind of turmoil at the moment. The past government was certainly pushing more organic agenda, because they said, but again, that agenda fits really well, but it's not consumed locally in Sri Lanka. The actual consumers for those kind of organic processes in the UK or in the Western world, because where people are willing to pay or can afford to pay. There's two different aspects of that. So, it's a the behavior certainly has, I've said, a huge kind of power in terms of influencing not just the, the consumption of the healthy product, but also industries. Because if there's a huge demand, then industry will have to rethink in terms of following those practices. And that is happening in other sectors as well, not just in the food. Like in fashion industry is another fantastic example. Like at least in the, I would say, in the Western world, now consumers are not willing to engage with any other sort of fashion brands if they are not really behaving sustainably. So that is putting in pressure that it's not simply about what we think, but it's also, I think, if we have to sustain, we have to survive in this, in this competitive landscape, then we have to follow those practices. So hopefully that answers your question. I know everybody's tired and maybe waiting for the food, but yes, if you got any questions, please do ask. But I said, I will leave my details in my slide. And I will certainly welcome, if you got questions, drop me an email. I'm normally very quick in responding. So I will get back to you, and I would love to hear. But any other questions, please feel free to ask.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Vikas. That was a great insight and clarifications. I think it's an interesting topic. What do you think? Isn't it? So I think it's kind of new with the concepts, but it's very interesting. And knowing that there are countries that have led years ago, so we need to move fast in this, inshallah. And hand in hand, we can work together. So tomorrow we're going to have the second session with more practical discussions, and we can have a recap of the principles, so that we can have a more interactive and fruitful discussion. Thank you for your attendance, and please let's head to lunch.
Nothing to add. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor. Please, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, thank you so much once again. I don't have anything to add. Just to I echo my friend and my colleague Omar, that we need to think sustainably. We need to put the concept of circular economy on the table and to put it like our to make it like a priority. And tomorrow, inshallah, we're gonna cover the topic of the concept of Industry 4.0 and the relationship between Industry 4.0 and circular economy. And luckily, we're gonna tomorrow cover the concept of RACP and some examples of RACP. So this is gonna be like more motivation to attend tomorrow, inshallah. So please do attend tomorrow. And as I mentioned, we're gonna distribute certificates for all participants who attended both days. Thank you once again, and please, you are all invited to lunch. Thank you.
Good luck.